Hey friends, tonight let's explore something a little sweet, a little crummy, and just a bit dusty like your grandma's cookie tin, but with more Latin inscriptions. We're going back to the days when shoes squeaked with wool, not rubber, and when cookies weren't just treats, they were survival tools. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And of course, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your time zone in the comments. Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. You're walking along a dirt road now. Pebbles crunch underfoot. The sun is somewhere above, cloaked behind a gentle smear of clouds. There's a breeze, cool, grassy, the kind that tugs at your woolen cloak and whispers, "Did you pack enough?" And you did, didn't you? Or maybe you didn't. And now you're chewing on the only thing that hasn't gone stale, a cookie from your shoe. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. In the high Middle Ages, from around the 11th to 14th centuries, Europe blossomed into one of the greatest walking experiments in history, the pilgrimage. Whether it was the scallop shell route to Santiago de Compostela, the long, dusty trail to Rome, or the holy and slightly terrifying road to Jerusalem, people walked. A lot. Rich people, poor people, people with questionable maps. And all of them had one big problem: medieval trail mix didn't exist. So they improvised. Tonight, your snack of choice is a biscuitum, a hard twice-baked lump of flour water, and sometimes honey or dried fruit. It's not chewy. It doesn't crumble. It's more like an edible stone tablet. But the miracle is, it lasts forever. Pilgrims often tuck these into belts, bags, and yes, even shoes. Why? Because shoes were warm, dry, and already smelled like desperation. Why not store food there too? Some tales claim the cookies were wrapped in linen. Others say they were rubbed with oil to preserve them. But here's your first odd truth of the night: the cookie and shoe trick wasn't just about storage. In some regions, pilgrims believed it protected them from illness or demons. Bless your feet, bless your food. And if you're lucky, blister-free toes. You take another bite, slow, contemplative, crunchy, enough to wake a nearby sparrow. The taste is simple flour, maybe a whisper of nutmeg. Not bad, not great, but deeply comforting. As you walk, you notice others joining the path. Some carry staffs, others rosaries, others just the weight of questions. And they all munch something. One older woman offers you a round, flat cake, slightly cracked, slightly sticky. You thank her, and she grins. "Almond and vinegar," she says proudly. Medieval cookies came in the endless varieties. Some were rich, stuffed with imported spices and sugar saved for the wealthy or holy days. Others were made from chestnut flour, chickpeas, or oats, humble ingredients baked with care. But most importantly, they were portable. A cookie wasn't a dessert, it was a plan, a companion, a roadmap made of crumbs. Now let's pause for one of those classic scholarly debates no one asked for. Were these medieval snacks cookies? By today's definition, culinary historians bicker about it. Some say yes, they were baked sweets, small and round. Others argue no, they were survival rations with no joy whatsoever. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, a sacred overlap of practicality and pastry. You keep walking. Ahead, a small shrine glows in the evening light. A flickering candle, a ribbon tied around a tree branch. Someone has left a tiny offering, a cookie shaped like a scallop shell. You smile. It's a symbol of St. James, patron of pilgrims. Edible devotion. Literal food for thought. A donkey ambles by carrying bundles wrapped in wool. One slips loose. You catch it, a bag of dried apple rings and biscuits. The owner thanks you and offers a trade. One cookie for another. Yours is simple. Theirs surprisingly salty with a hint of rosemary. You nod, amused. A medieval snack swap. The original bartering system, now with extra carbs. Of course, not all cookies were for travelers. In monasteries, special journey biscuits were prepared for those about to leave for long distances. They were blessed often with prayers for safe passage. There's a calm intimacy in imagining monks gathering around a kitchen fire, whispering Latin over baking trays. Tonight's quirky detail. In some parts of Europe, bakers would stamp cookies with tiny images, a sun, across a pilgrim's staff. Not just decoration, they believed the symbol transferred protection to the traveler. Protection by pastry, the most delicious defense mechanism in history. You pause at a stream, the water burbles softly. You sit on a mossy rock, take off your shoe, and inspect what's left. One slightly smushed cookie, it's warm from your foot, but still whole. You smile. Chewy or not, this one's been with you for miles. You snap it in half. A small miracle, it's not moldy. There's something deeply human in that bite. A reminder that even centuries ago, people knew a journey without a snack is just suffering with extra steps. So you chew slowly. You watch the light dip below the hills. Someone in the distance sings softly something old and off-key, a lullaby for pilgrims, a hymn for cookies. And as your eyes begin to close, here's your final trivia. Bite-some recipes for medieval travel cookies are still used today. Panforte in Italy, Pfeffernusse in Germany. Dense, fragrant, meant to last through storms and stories. One last thought before sleep nibbles at your edges. If you packed a cookie in your shoe today, would it be for hunger or hope? The road continues beneath your feet, more dust than stone now curling like a ribbon into a countryside that smells of thyme, livestock, and freshly tilled earth. Somewhere behind you, bells toll in a distant village marking the hour when most people would stop walking. But not you. You've got another half cookie in your shoe and a story in your bones. Let's talk about the medieval road snack that wasn't quite a cookie, and not quite not a cookie the wafer, or as we know it now, the wafer. Yes, the same kind of thin, crispy treat that gets stuck to your teeth after a childhood ice cream. But back then, wafers were often pressed between hot metal plates by street-side vendors, cloaked in flour dust and smoke, serving up thin sheets of dough etched with religious imagery or local gossip. That's right, some wafers doubled as edible news. You stop by a small wooden stall on the roadside. The vendor, an old man with hands like overcooked turkey legs, flips a hot iron plate. He offers you a wafer just a little scorched with the imprint of a saint's face and the words pray and pay. Classic marketing. You bite into it, sweetened with honey, a whisper of lavender, crisp like fall leaves underfoot. That's your historical fact of the evening. Medieval wafers were often sweet, portable, and made on hot iron presses sometimes by guild-trained waferers. Yes, that's a real word. Entire streets in big cities like London and Paris were dedicated to wafer makers, especially around holidays or feast days. Now here comes the weird bit. In more than one record, wafers were tied into pilgrim challenges. Kind of like today's social media dares, except you had to eat the wafer without breaking it, while walking backwards, reciting a psalm, and not stepping on any cracks. Fail no forgiveness. Try again tomorrow. Imagine that medieval TikTok, but with sandals and guilt. As you pass under a wooden arch hung with wind chimes made from cutlery, you hear children laughing. They're chasing each other with tiny clay trays shaped like waffle presses. Play, prayer, pastry, it all overlaps. A young boy offers you something that looks like a burnt leaf. He says it's a fast day flake. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. It's like a wafer, but with no joy. You chew it anyway. It's dry but edible. Lent approved. This is where we pause for a debate that no one will resolve, but everyone likes to argue anyway. Did medieval people really enjoy these things? Culinary historians are divided. Some say wafers were festive delights, dressed up with spices and nuts. Others claim they were utilitarian, like religious toast. But here's the truth, is slipping between the lines, it probably depended on the day and the cook, and whether you could afford cinnamon. A nun in a straw hat passes by, balancing a stack of folded wafers in a linen wrap. She nods at you, says something about saints watching snack choices. You nod back solemnly, holding your cookie shoe close. A little side note for your amusement: in some regions, wafers were gifted in lieu of coins. That's right, instead of dropping a penny in the cup of a beggar, you might offer them a wafer with a little prayer pressed into the crust. Generosity with frosting. Charity by a crunch. You sit again by a roadside shrine and notice a pattern. The snacks here aren't just food. They're symbols. The wafer especially was layered spiritually and socially. Sometimes holy, sometimes hilarious. A snack, a sermon, and a social statement all rolled into one thin disc. Let's bring in the monks again, because monks are always secretly behind the best snacks. Wafer recipes were often kept in monasteries. Some were flavored with almond milk, others with rose water. A few were allegedly spiked with a dash of wine. To keep them sterile, the records say, you raise an eyebrow. Convenient theology. A final observation before sleep slides closer, the wafer was one of the few snacks that traveled through class lines. Poor pilgrims ate them. Nobles sent them as gifts. Even kings nibbled them during feasts. The only difference was the topping or the number of layers. You close your eyes, your belly is just full enough, your feet ache in that sweet way that means you've earned the evening. Somewhere behind your closed lids, a wafer presses its ghost shape into your dreams, thin, crisp, and possibly holy. And as we settle into silence, three soft thoughts drift in like crumbs under a blanket. If you eat a wafer in the woods and no one sees it, is it still sacred? If a monk makes a wafer with wine and almonds, is he technically a dessert chef? And if you had to press your own motto into a cookie tonight, what would it say? The sun has dipped lower now, a gold coin slipping under the hills, and the sky has turned the color of old parchment, with wine stains at the edges. You're still walking. Somehow the rhythm of your steps feels softer than before, like your body has synced up with the hum of distant bells, the breeze through cypress trees, and the faint crackle of something baking far off. You reach a crossroads. There's no sign, only a crooked bench and a shrine made of stacked stones and crusts of bread. No really hard bread crusts shaped like a little roof. And that brings us neatly to tonight's featured snack hard bread, also known as panis duris hardtack, or if you were particularly annoyed with it, teeth breaker. See, when medieval folks set out on pilgrimages, they didn't have rolling coolers or collapsible meal kits. What they had was bread, but not the fluffy kind. Oh no, this was bread designed to survive a siege, a storm, a sermon, and a stampede of goats, all without getting moldy. Your current piece of travel bread, it's roughly the size and density of a paving stone. You tap it against your knee. It doesn't break. Your knee nearly does. But here's the thing, once softened in soup ale or even a splash of vinegar, it becomes edible. Not delightful edible, and it was a medieval staple. Every pilgrim carried a few loaves. Some were spiced, others were blessed. A few were rumored to have hidden messages inside, like edible fortune cookies written in Latin. That's your fact for the night. Medieval travel bread was designed not for flavor, but for endurance. It could last weeks, months if wrapped right. Soldiers, sailors, monks, and mothers all carried versions of it. And here's your side quirk. Some pilgrims wore their bread on their body. Yes, around the neck in satchels or in one infamous case stitched into the lining of a cloak. The logic was sound. If thieves stole your satchel, they probably wouldn't steal your sleeves. Now you break off a bit and pop it into your mouth. It tastes like dust, time, and regret, but it fills your belly, and that's the point. Let's stir up a little academic argument before we wander off to dreams. Some historians argue that this bread proves pilgrims were practical, thrifty, and communal, since bread could be shared, traded, or even donated to shrines. Others say this points to a rigid food culture where survival trumped taste, and travel was mostly an act of penance, not pleasure. You just want something softer. And look, there it is. A woman sitting cross-legged by a small fire, boiling water in a soot-stained pot. She offers you a bowl of bread soup, a few cubes of yesterday's loaf floating in broth, with leeks, garlic, and maybe a suspiciously cheerful beet. You sip. It's comforting, salty, and for once, the bread doesn't fight back. Across from you, a young girl is carving a piece of hard bread into the shape of a small cat. Her father looks on amused. You ask if it's for fun. It's a travel token, he says. Some say carved bread brings luck, or at least gives the children something to do. You smile. Crafting carbs into cats, clearly the Middle Ages' new joy. You're reminded suddenly that bread wasn't just food. It was currency, ritual, even medicine in some places. In parts of Eastern Europe, monks would soak stale bread in beer, then warm it and serve it to the sick as a tonic. Bread became a base layer for most medieval dishes, trencher plates, bread stews, bread puddings. It was the plate, the sponge, the dessert. You pick up another chunk. You notice that the edges have been carefully scored with a knife. At first you think it's decoration, but then you see the same marks on another person's bread. Secret pilgrim code, baker's mark, or a message from someone long gone. No one answers. The fire crackles. A distant wolf howls. You realize again how many things the medieval world baked into its bread blessings, burdened secrets and sustenance. Before you sleep, 3 crumb-sized thoughts land lightly on your shoulder like flour dust. If your food can double as a hammer, should it? Is there something oddly noble about a bread that refuses to rot? And if you had to bake your memories into something to last 1,000 miles, would they rise? You wrap the remaining chunk in cloth, not because it tastes good, but because it feels ancient and oddly sacred. Like history, you can chew on slowly, stubbornly, and one bite at a time. The stars are out now, blinking through the gauzy veil of dusk like they've lost their bedtime. You're still walking because somehow it feels like each step brings you closer to the quiet center of the world. The ground crunches softly beneath your feet, not from gravel, but from crumbs. You look down. Yes, a trail of crushed cookies leading toward a dim lantern glow. And here we are. Medieval cookies, or as they were often called, wafers, spiced biscuits, and honey cakes, the gentle, stubborn cousins of bread born for travel and for moments of joy. You step into a small wayside hut where a young boy is selling tiny round cookies crisp at the edges and flecked with caraway seeds. He calls them Pilgrims buttons. You offer a coin. He shakes his head. Say a prayer instead. You do. Something humble like, "May I not chip a tooth?" He nods approvingly. Tonight's snack is not about survival, it's about comfort. See, while most travel food was built to endure punishment, heat time, Bandit's cookies were about morale. And morale was no joke on the road. Long pilgrimages meant sore feet, bad weather, and the occasional plague. A little bite of something sweet could feel like divine intervention. Here's your fact of the night: medieval cookies were often flavored with exotic spices like cinnamon, ginger, and cloves, the same stuff used in perfumes and potions. Why? Because pilgrims could sometimes access them through trade routes, monastery donations, or wealthy patrons. And also because they made dry dough taste like something worth smiling over. And now your quirksome cookies were shaped like saints. Yes, tiny edible sculptures of St. Catherine, St. James, even St. Apollonia, the patron saint of teeth, which feels ironic considering cookies. Some pilgrims wouldn't eat them at all, just carry them as edible relics. You take a bite of your pilgrim's button. It's crunchy, subtly sweet with a zing of pepper at the end. Not bad. Actually, pretty great. It leaves just enough sweetness on your tongue to make you want another. You sit near the fire. Around you, other travelers nibble quietly. A woman passes you a tin shaped like a shoebox. Inside, dozens of cookies packed with leaves of dried mint to preserve them. You glance down at your own shoes, suddenly suspicious. She grins. It's a tradition, she says. Sometimes we hide the good ones in our boots. And that's no joke. Some pilgrims pack cookies in their shoes not just to hide them from thieves, but to soften the soles or mask the smell. Or maybe just because cookies in your shoes are better than no cookies at all. Debate time scholars often argue whether medieval cookies were everyday food or sacred treat. Some say they were handed out during feast days only. Others point to accounts of street vendors selling cookies in markets and outside churches. Maybe the answer is both. Sacred when shared, common when needed, much like sleep. The wind picks up. You wrap your cloak tighter. A monk across the fire is carving a cookie stamp from olive wood, tiny patterns meant to press a design into dough. He explains that certain monasteries coded messages into cookies this way. A swirl meant safe travel. A triangle, pray for rain. A star, beware of cats. He's joking. You hope? Now 3 crumbs of thought before bed. If your best cookies are hidden in your shoes, what does that say about your priorities? Should we take more time to bake our hopes into things? And are cookies still cookies if no one ever eats them? You tuck the last pilgrim's button into your pocket. It crumbles slightly. You smile. Tomorrow you'll walk again and maybe forget the road's name. But tonight you'll remember this tiny, crisp warmth shaped like a prayer and dusted in sugar. You wake before dawn, nudged by the earthy scent of dew, and something faintly toasted like warm flour meeting the edges of fire. The camp around you stirs gently. Cloaks shift. Pilgrims murmur sleepy prayers. But your attention is drawn to that smell again, curling in the morning air like a whispered secret. You follow it past the sleeping travelers and toward a modest clay oven nestled beside a small chapel. A woman in a linen headscarf is baking early medieval wafers, not the sacramental kind, but the street snack version, thin, crispy, sweet or savory, and wrapped in ritual. You sit nearby, not speaking, just watching. She pours a pale batter into a hot iron mold, closes it gently, and waits. The scent intensifies. You imagine it's like being near the first pancake on a Sunday morning, a little burnt, a little glorious, entirely worth the wait. Here's your historical fact for the day. In medieval Europe, wafers, or wafres in Old French, were often sold by special street vendors called oublieurs, named after their signature iron tools called oubli irons. The word oubli comes from the same root as to forget. Why? Because eating one was meant to help you forget your troubles, even just for a moment. Some were plain, made from water and flour alone. Others were laced with honey milk and spices folded and layered like paper or curled into little horns. Richer towns might offer cheese wafers with caraway or sweet ones stuffed with almond paste. Peasants. They made do with what they had, but they still pressed those thin rounds with care. And the quirky detail, many wafer sellers performed tiny dances or sang jingles to attract customers. One troubadour described a seller who wore bells on his shoes and yelled, "Forget your sins, eat a wafer," which might be the world's first marketing slogan and confessional shortcut. The wafer maker beside you hands you one still hot, marked with a repeating crosshatch from the iron and drizzled lightly with honey. You bite. It shatters against your teeth and melts. The sweetness is subtle, but the joy immediate. You're not alone. Around the oven, others begin to gather, pilgrims and children, even a sleepy friar, with a mouth already full of crumbs. It's a quiet communion, not of faith, but of flour. Here comes the scholarly argument of the morning, were wafers meant to be street food or religious symbolism? The lines blur. Oublieurs sold snack wafers on feast days and at pilgrim stops. But the exact same iron molds were used in monasteries to make Eucharistic bread. Did the sacred and the snack ever touch? Did the communion of flour spill into the market? Some historians say no. Others point to odd recipe books with both sacred and street recipes side by side, sometimes written by the same hand. It's almost as if the act of pressing batter into form, into shape, into meaning was more important than the purpose it served. You lean back, belly-warm hands sticky with honey. The sun peeks over the horizon. A young boy nearby is stacking cooled wafers into a tall tower, pretending it's a cathedral. It collapses. He giggles. Then he eats the evidence. And now, as promised, 3 tiny thoughts with your breakfast crumbs. If a snack can help you forget sorrow, does that make it medicine? Should joy always come with a crunch? And what do you call a food that's both holy and sold 3 for a penny? You tuck a spare wafer into your satchel. It'll crumble by midday, of course. But right now, it's a warm circle of sweetness. You travel under an apricot sky, the kind of color that medieval artists tried to recreate with powdered minerals and prayers. Dust kicks up with every step, and the scent of your crumbling shortbread companions clings to the folds of your tunic. You wonder if bees might start following you. The road you walk now is sun-warmed and dappled, winding through patches of trees and open fields dotted with oxen, and the occasional goat chewing something that absolutely isn't its business. But your thoughts aren't on livestock. No, you're thinking about cookies. Not the chocolate chip kind, of course. No medieval baker was tossing chunks of semi-sweet Nestlé into a buttery dough. But cookies, or biscotti rusk's hard wafers, were absolutely part of the pilgrim diet. Not as indulgent dessert, but as something far more important, portable hope. You pause at a dusty crossroads where a small crowd has gathered. An old woman sits with a basket on her lap filled with hard cookies the size of your palm. Each one is wrapped in cloth tied with twine. She offers you one, and you notice the dough is flecked with anise seed, rosemary, and tiny petals, maybe marigold, maybe something else. You don't ask, you just bite, crunch, It's dry, tough. But then the flavors unfurl: sharp herbs, a hint of honey, a warming spice you can't name. It's oddly satisfying. A cookie for travel, a cookie that waits. The historical fact of the hour: medieval pilgrims often carried journey cakes, St. James biscuits or twice-baked cookies, dry, dense confections meant to survive time, temperature, and trouble. Some were dunked in wine, others were soaked in broth. A few were chewed slowly like edible prayers. The weird detail: in certain regions of France and Spain, pilgrims would literally soak cookies into their shoes, not just for storage, but for superstition. One tale tells of a young woman who believed every step with a cookie beneath her heel brought her closer to forgiveness, or at least better foot support. You chew thoughtfully, imagining the medieval version of an energy bar, one that also functioned as a foot warmer. Who needs modern orthotics when you have baked goods underfoot? The road continues, and with it a small debate emerges among your fellow travelers. Were these cookies food charm or talisman? Some insist they were blessed before baking. Others say the symbols pressed into the dough crosses, fish scallop shells imbued the snack with protective magic. A few skeptics argue it was just a clever way to carry calories. This, dear listener, is your open academic question. At what point does a food stop being food and start being belief? You walk in silence for a bit, letting the crumbly sweetness linger. In your bag now are 2 more cookies wrapped in linen and tied with twine. Not for now, for later. For a moment when your feet are tired and your heart is a little empty. And now 3 crumbs of thought for the curious. If you walk 1,000 miles on a cookie, does that make it a sacred relic? Could you technically bless a modern granola bar if you were desperate? And should we bring back the tradition of edible shoe insoles? You pass a chapel carved into the hillside. On its wooden door is a drawing: a cookie with wings. Someone's joke or someone's truth. Either way, you smile and you walk on. You wake early the next day, stirred by birds you don't recognize, and the soft creak of a leather flask refilled nearby. The air is cool, tinged with mist, and something toasted someone's already warming breakfast over a tiny fire of damp twigs and dried dung. Charming. Today's walk is gentler. You cross a stone bridge built crookedly over a stream so shallow even the frogs look unimpressed. But your mood lifts because ahead, just past the bend, is a sight every medieval pilgrim quietly hoped for: a wafer seller. Yes, you heard that right. A wafer cart run by an older man whose beard is long and flour-dusted and whose wooden box opens like a magician's trunk. Inside are rows of delicate, crispy wafers stacked like playing cards. They are warm, sweet, paper-thin. He sees your interest and smiles. Fresh this morning, he says, placing one gently into your palm. You bite in. It's a soft crunch at first, then a whisper of honey cinnamon and a curious hint of rose water. It dissolves almost immediately, leaving behind warmth and a grin. You buy another. The historical fact tonight is this: wafers, or wafers in Middle English, were a popular medieval snack, especially among pilgrims, festival goers, and the clergy. Made from flour water and sometimes sweetened with sugar or spiced with exotic ingredients, wafers were cooked between 2 heated metal plates, often engraved with religious or symbolic designs. The result: an edible token, a crunchy reminder that yes, you were there, and yes, you could eat the memory. Now here's your quirky detail of the evening. Some wafer sellers were licensed to operate only during feast days and were considered halfway between street cooks and street performers. They'd shout, juggle, sing, and sometimes, if you were lucky, toss wafers into the crowd like edible confetti. One English manuscript even records a man being fined for flinging waferes with ungodly enthusiasm. Imagine that citation. You take your 3rd wafer and sit near a mossy wall, letting it melt, while watching the seller carefully brush off his iron plates with a bundle of herbs. You wonder what he dreams of. Wafers chasing him through the streets. Wafers with wings again. Here's your gentle academic puzzle: were wafers food art or liturgy? In some churches, special wafers were made for religious ceremonies, but secular versions existed right beside them. Both shared tools, techniques, and often bakers. So where does devotion end and dessert begin? You lean back, feeling the sun on your face and wafer crumbs in your collar. A breeze picks up. You hear a laugh in the distance. And from the wafer seller's cart, a soft sizzling sound starts again, the next batch rising like thin gold between iron. And before we close this part of the journey, 3 crumbs of speculation. Were medieval wafers the original business cards? Here's my crest, now eat it. Could you confess your sins by eating something shaped like your vices? And if someone flung a wafer at you with ungodly enthusiasm, would you be offended or delighted? By the time you reach the next village, your shoes are carrying a faint, sweet aroma. Not because of some divine revelation or roadside bakery, but because those pilgrim cookies, wrapped carefully in linen, are now slightly warm from your walking and might just be steaming faint vanilla into your socks. You sit by a crumbling stone wall, its moss-covered edge a perfect bench. In the distance, a bell tolls the evening call. A few other travelers are gathering some shaking dust from their sandals, others nibbling on bits of fruit or cheese. One older woman pulls out a small loaf stuffed with onion and sage, baked hard as a brick and likely to survive a war. But you unwrap another treat. This one's a pressed date roll, possibly flavored with caraway or maybe fennel. The surprise is half the fun. These snacks weren't labeled. No medieval nutrition facts. Just a hopeful guess that what your cousin packed wouldn't turn entirely to stone before Bordeaux. Pilgrims had a few rules for their travel food. It had to be durable, edible, cold, and ideally smell less like a fish market after 3 days. Most importantly, it had to fit in your pack or your shoes, apparently. Let's explore that a bit. Why shoes? Was it custom necessity, or maybe just medieval multitasking? Turns out foot travel was exhausting and space was precious. Some shoes were stitched wide with extra layers, ideal for tucking in a dry biscuit or hard cheese disc. Socks doubled as pockets. Scarves were snack bags. You wore your larder. One friar even wrote about keeping roasted chickpeas sewn into the hem of his habit. For penance and protein, he allegedly claimed. Tonight's historical fact. It was common for medieval travelers to carry journey bread, a dense, unleavened cake meant to last weeks without mold. Often this bread was baked with dried fruit, coarse flour, and honey. It was food and fuel in one. The same style of bread was used for sea voyages. Odd detail of the night, some pilgrims used holy water to knead their dough, hoping to bake spiritual protection into their snacks. Pilgrim cookie meets divine insurance policy. If the devil dared touch your tartlet, well, it had been blessed. Here's the scholarly head-scratcher. Were medieval travel snacks really that common? Or are we projecting modern ideas of food on the go into the past? Some historians argue most travelers stopped at monasteries or markets daily, needing no such stash. Others point to surviving recipes, crumbs, and manuscript margins, and cheeky scribbles about bread fit for walking. You chew quietly on your fig bar, possibly a relic, possibly genius, and glance down the path. The sun is leaning hard into the horizon now. Shadows grow long. A few younger pilgrims are singing something off-key, maybe a psalm, or maybe just a tavern tune dressed in biblical clothing. You pack up. Your shoes feel lighter somehow, or maybe it's just that your feet have become cookies themselves, half pastry, half purpose. The next leg of the journey begins. A group of fellow travelers waves you over to a fire pit nestled between 2 olive trees. They're roasting something, a root, maybe parsnip or burdock, and passing around a wineskin that smells more like vinegar than victory. You sit down, grateful for the warmth and the company. One man offers you a sliver of dried apple wrapped in something thin and crackling. Pilgrim paper, he laughs. It's a stretched out wafer made from ground almonds and honey flattened so thin it shatters like glass. Sweet, crisp, and absurdly delicate. You nibble cautiously. Turns out pilgrims were connoisseurs of texture. Not by choice, but necessity. Crunch kept spirits high. Soft meant stale. If your bread's squished instead of snapped, you'd better eat fast or feed it to a nearby goat. One woman pulls out a pouch of what looks like gravel. Hazelnuts and dried peas, she explains. Seasoned with ash salt. You nod like that's perfectly normal, because out here it is. Everyone's a gourmand when survival is involved. Now you're thinking about that journey bread again. Did they use different recipes by region? Was a German pilgrim's loaf heartier than a Breton's? Did spice levels shift with latitude? Someone should write a cookbook, Snacking Across Christendom. First edition dry, second edition slightly less dry. You sip something warm from a chipped clay cup. Spiced milk. It tastes of clove and sleep. The fire crackles a background lullaby. The wind shifts gently, carrying stories and steam in equal measure. You close your eyes just briefly as someone begins to hum a tune older than any road. Your stomach is full. Your feet, despite their cookie burden, feel lighter. You think maybe, just maybe, you could walk another 100 miles as long as the next cookie doesn't crumble entirely. You wake up stiff. Your back has become intimate with a root system that may predate the abbey itself. Morning light filters through a canopy of damp linen and coarse wool. Yes, that's your cloak, and yes, it's collected dew like a sponge. But no matter. The birds are practicing a choral piece with more enthusiasm than skill, and somewhere nearby, someone's chewing noisily on a hard pear. You sit up, stretch, and fish around for breakfast. Out comes a small sack of what could best be described as medieval granola oats, dried crab apples, nuts that may or may not be acorns, all clinging together by sheer stubbornness. It tastes like bark, but cheerful bark. Somehow it hits the spot. One of the younger pilgrims, a boy no older than 13, traveling with an uncle who's already 4 bread loaves into the day, offers you something new, a small, flattened round wrapped in leaves. It smells faintly floral. You bite. It's lavender honey smeared over something approximating toasted millet. From a nunnery 2 towns back, the boy says. They make them on feast days. And just like that, we stumble into today's snack convent confections. If monks were known for brewing and baking in quiet contemplation, nuns were culinary masterminds in their own right, particularly when it came to sweets. Behind cloistered walls, women turned humble ingredients into whisper-soft wafers, rose petal jellies, and almond sugar bites that melted faster than prayers. Historical fact time. Many of the earliest preserved cookie recipes from Europe come not from royal kitchens, but from convents. Sisters recorded them, carefully passed them down, and even sold some treats at nearby markets to fund charitable efforts. Today's oddity: some convents had what might generously be called snack bells. Instead of ringing only for prayers, they rang for baking milestones like the rising of dough or the cooling of a sugar glaze. The idea of divine timing takes on new meaning when heaven smells like shortbread. As you walk again, chewing slowly, grateful for honey, you realize something charming. Medieval snack culture wasn't just about survival. It was about creativity, pride, a little comfort when your feet screamed louder than a bishop in debate, academic curiosity of the morning. Were convent recipes intentionally different from secular ones, or did they evolve simply from availability and economy? Some scholars argue that religious sweets had spiritual symbolism. Others suggest nuns were just excellent at flavor combinations. Maybe both. Maybe the divine can also be delicious. A light drizzle starts. You don't mind. Your cloak smells like herbs, now must have slept near a patch of thyme. The path ahead twists between fields and low stone fences. A dog barks lazily from a cottage. And you think, not for the first time, that pilgrimage isn't just a journey of the soul. It's also a walking buffet curated by centuries of trial error and edible theology. You take another bite of lavender honey millet and feel oddly hopeful. By now, your feet are no longer just tired. They've begun negotiations with your knees, sending passive-aggressive pulses up your legs in protest. But the road keeps calling. It always does. You follow it through a stretch of fields where wheat sways lazily in the golden hour and birds dart low over wild herbs. A cart passes creaking under barrels and blessings, and the driver nods at you without a word, as if both of you know that silence makes the journey sacred. You're not hungry, not exactly, but the day has a way of making room in your stomach. You reach into your side pouch, which might once have been a sock, and pull out a small cloth bundle. Inside, a snack made famous, not by richness or rarity, but by survival, the humble almond biscuit. Now here's tonight's historical truth. Almonds were everywhere in medieval cuisine, not because they were trendy or toasted on Instagram, but because milk from animals was forbidden during many fast days. Almond milk became the substitute, and from almond milk came almond paste, and from that, snacks like the one melting a bit in your hand. The biscuit is dry, a bit chewy, slightly sweet, scented with rose water and a whisper of cinnamon. It crumbles like sandstone but lingers like incense. You chew slowly, each bite releasing a story of spice routes, trade ships, and monks who somehow figured out how to bake joy into bean flour. Here's the quirky side fact. Some wealthier pilgrims had their family crests baked into their travel cookies. Think of it as medieval edible branding. If you dropped a biscuit and someone else picked it up, you could probably argue theft, or at least improper snacking. You walk past a shrine now small, weather-worn, guarded by birds and bees. Tucked into the stones are little offerings, ribbon-dried lavender pebbles shaped like hearts. You place a few biscuit crumbs, they're unsure if it's pious or just polite. Either way, the ants seem grateful. As you continue, the road narrows into a shadowy path, pine trees hemming you in, like cathedral columns. A fellow traveler appears from behind a bend, a lanky man in a patched cloak humming to himself. He offers you a flat cake wrapped in oiled paper. You hesitate, he smells faintly of onions, and hope but accept. The cake is crisp, salted, and flavored, with something you can't name. Maybe time, maybe mystery. This you think is the joy of the road, the randomness of kindness, the mystery of flavors, the way hunger rearranges your standards until even crust tastes like celebration. Scholars still debate, were such roadside food exchanges common or rare? Some say travelers held tightly to their rations, fearing scarcity. Others argue a kind of shared hospitality existed among pilgrims, a barter system of calories and companionship. Maybe the truth is both. Maybe sometimes you gave a cookie to gain a friend. The sun sinks lower, drenching everything in bronze. A breeze brings with it the scent of garlic and wood smoke. Up ahead, there's a makeshift camp, a ring of stones travelers, warming lentil stew over a slow flame bread, baking under a clay lid. You're invited in with a wave. You sit. The man with the onion aura pulls out another snack-dried apple slices soaked in vinegar and honey. They're tangy, tough, and oddly delightful. You laugh. Someone offers a game of dice. Another sings something about St. James and sandals. This is the snack hour of the medieval day. Not a feast, not a fast, just the quiet middle moment when the journey pauses and your belly catches up to your feet. Historical footnote. Almond snacks weren't just for fasting or traveling. In some monasteries, almond paste was sculpted into symbolic shapes, lambs, fish, tiny chalices, and served during holy festivals. So yes, even medieval monks enjoyed playing with their food. You lie back, your body grateful for the rest. Someone is handing out tiny cups of herbal wine brewed with rosemary and cloves. You sip. It burns a little. It helps more. And just as the stars begin pricking the sky, you take one last almond biscuit from your pouch. You break it in half, offer it to the humming man. He nods, accepts. For a while, you both chew in silence, the fire popping nearby, the road asleep. Then the bells of a distant chapel ring out. You both look toward the sound, toward the path that keeps stretching into the unknown, and without a word begin to pack. The journey waits. And maybe there are cookies at the next village too. The morning air tastes faintly of dew and ash. Somewhere nearby, someone is tending a small fire, and the distant clink of metal on pot says porridge is underway, though not yours. Your breakfast today is more portable, more poetic, and far more crunchy. You reach into your satchel and pull out a flat brown disc wrapped in waxed linen. It's slightly cracked, dusted with flour, and smells faintly of cloves. This dear sleeper is a medieval honey wafer, or if you prefer its Latin name, oblata dulcis, which sounds a bit like a spell and works much the same. Crunch. The bite is loud, a small scandal in this otherwise silent meadow. A few birds look your way affronted. One flies off, the rest tolerate your snack. Medieval wafers were not the soft confections you might picture now. These were iron-pressed, griddle-baked, often made with just flour, water, and honey. Sometimes eggs were added for richness, sometimes spices, but always they were thin, portable, and sturdy enough to survive a pilgrimage or two. You walk slowly now, the wafer held between your fingers like a compass. It points nowhere, but it leads you on. Here's your historical fact of the hour. In medieval Europe, wafers were not only snacks, but sacrament. They evolved from liturgical breads and were often sold outside churches. Some were even shaped with patterns of saints' crosses or sacred symbols. Eating one was a quiet prayer, a crisp devotion. And the odd detail some wafer sellers known as oblatrices wore little bells on their belts so you could hear your snack coming before you saw it. A sort of holy ice cream truck, but with more theology and less dairy. You pass an old millstone half buried in weeds. A child has left a bundle of dandelions there arranged with care. Maybe a game, maybe a tribute, or maybe someone just really likes symmetrical flowers. Now, the scholarly conundrum of today, were wafers truly a common snack among pilgrims? Some argue they were too delicate, too symbolic, too entwined with religious rites. Others insist that the street versions were entirely distinct, a secular cousin to sacred bread, sold with laughter rather than liturgy. Maybe both are true. Maybe the line between holy and hungry was thinner than a wafer itself. You crunch again, and this time you taste something unexpected, a little pop of anise, or maybe dried lavender. A surprise like finding poetry in a ledger. By the midday, you pass a group of pilgrims resting beneath a tree. One is sketching something in the dirt with a stick, a crude map, a prayer, a recipe for fig tarts, impossible to say. They invite you to sit and someone offers a split wafer. You break it together, no words needed, just crumbs breeze and mutual understanding. You wonder what the wafer means to each of them. Is it just a bite to hold them over a relic of home? A reminder of ritual, or maybe, just maybe a sweet excuse to pause. You sip water from your flask and suddenly the flavors in your mouth deepen. The honey comes alive, the spice sharpens. You imagine monks in distant kitchens pouring batter into hot irons and whispering blessings as steam rose in halos. As the group moves on, you linger a moment longer. A few crumbs remain in your palm, glittering like golden dust. You let them fall to the ground and smile. That was a good wafer. Your sandals hit softer ground, now a stretch of meadow that seems to breathe with you. There's dew on the grass, and for a second the horizon disappears in mist. You follow the faint path carved not by carts, but by feet, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all walking towards some version of hope. It smells faintly of thyme and sweet earth. If you squint, you can almost see the footprints of old pilgrims woven into the soil like a forgotten recipe. As the sun climbs higher, the need for something sweet returns. Not hunger exactly, but the kind of craving that makes your jaw tighten and your feet move faster. You rummage through your pack and find something odd, a thin, crumbling disc wrapped in waxed linen. It's golden, a little sticky, and when you bite into it, the taste is unmistakable. Honey wafer. Not the holy kind offered at communion. No, this is the secular sibling, a pilgrim's delight made from flower honey, and maybe the prayers of a slightly bored monastery cook. Crisp on the edges, chewy at the center, it practically hums with the warmth of the hearth it was baked on. Wafers, or oblata dulces, were a curious thing in medieval Europe. Initially a religious item, they crossed the culinary border into secular hands sometime in the 13th century. Pilgrims especially adored them. Easy to store, light to carry, and best of all, sweet enough to make the road feel a little shorter. Some were shaped like flowers. Others carried the imprint of saints or abstract patterns, little edible prayers you could tuck under your tongue. They were made in heavy irons, clamped over open flames, and occasionally spiced with things like rose water or ground almonds. If you were lucky, you'd find one still warm from the press traded at a roadside stall by a nun with entrepreneurial instincts. Tonight's historical fact: wafers were among the first foods to blur the line between sacred and snack. Monasteries often made them for religious rituals, but over time they became a form of charitable giving and eventually commerce. By the 14th century, street vendors in cities like Paris or London sold wafers to anyone with a coin and a craving. Odd detail of the night: in some areas, wafers were given as a kind of edible greeting card. One noblewoman even had her family crest pressed into a batch meant to impress visiting clergy. Medieval PR, but sugary. Here's your scholarly debate. Did the spread of wafers into everyday culture mark a culinary evolution or a quiet dilution of sacred meaning? One camp argues that food should remain rooted in ritual. Another claims that eating a saint-shaped cookie is the highest form of devotion. As always, it depends on how loudly you chew. You finish the wafer and lick the crumbs from your fingers. The sun is getting nosy now, peeking through the clouds like a gossip. Up ahead, a small grove sways gently as if beckoning. A few pilgrims are resting in the shade, one of them fanning himself with a page torn from a poorly written psalm. You join them and share a fig. Someone offers a sliver of smoked eel. Another hands you a boiled egg wrapped in cloth still warm. There's no talking, just nods and the quiet exchange of food like ancient currency. Then, as if the forest itself leans closer, someone pulls out a small iron mold. It looks like something stolen from a blacksmith, but smells faintly of cinnamon. Without a word, they press it into the embers of a nearby fire. A few minutes later, a fresh wafer is born. Steam, sugar, silence. The pilgrim breaks it in half and hands you a piece. No speech, no sermon, just sweetness shared. This is what wafers became in the Middle Ages. Not just snacks, not just symbols, but bridges between people, between the sacred and the silly, between where you started and where you're going. You lean back against the tree and let the wafer melt on your tongue. It tastes like stories not yet told, like footsteps ahead, like faith made crunchy. The road calls again, but softer now. Your pack is a little lighter, your spirit strangely full. You rise, brush the crumbs from your tunic, and take the first step forward. You arrive at the town of Shard just as the sun is lowering behind the cathedral towers, gilding the stained glass in flickers of red and gold. The bells chime low and slow, 6 deep notes that echo like a mother's voice down a long hallway. You've made it through another day, and your reward, a square of honey wafer carefully unwrapped from a scrap of parchment. Not unlike the town itself, a little sweet, a little fragile, and somewhat stuck to your sleeve. These wafers oblata dulces are the kind of treat you don't bite so much as absorb. They dissolve gently on the tongue, offering not just sweetness, but the ghost of almond, a suggestion of orange flower water, and a dusting of something almost cinnamon, but not quite. A spice that tastes like it was whispered rather than ground. This wasn't just food. These were ritual offerings once given at abbeys, served at the edges of feast days, tucked into a bishop's glove in place of coin. Wafers straddled a curious line, sacred and snackable. Tonight's historical fact: by the 13th century, wafers were often prepared by religious orders for both liturgical use and everyday consumption. Convents in particular were known to bake them not only for Mass, but also for guest pilgrims and as a source of income. The thin irons used to press the wafers often bore intricate patterns, crosses, vines, or initials of the baking house. And here's your oddity of the night. Some wafers were spiced with lavender or rose petals and occasionally wrapped in edible gold leaf, especially if they were being offered to nobility or perhaps a particularly charismatic abbot. Now, the academic puzzle: were these wafers universally seen as holy confections, or did they slide quietly into the realm of common street food? There are records of wafer sellers at markets and fairs ringing bells and shouting prices, but some scholars argue this was a separate evolution entirely. 2 wafer worlds, one sacred, one saucy. You nibble yours slowly while sitting on the cool rim of a fountain in the town square. A group of children run by, chasing a dog and scattering dandelion fluff. Somewhere a woman laughs behind a lace-curtained window. There's something lovely about eating something this delicate in a world so dusty. And the wafer doesn't judge. It doesn't care if your sandals are falling apart or if you forgot the evening prayer. It just melts. You close your eyes and let it become part of you, a whisper of sweetness in a long day's journey. Later that night, when the pilgrims gather in the guest house shoulder to shoulder, bowl to bowl, someone passes around another stack of wafers. These ones slightly thicker, more rustic, probably sweetened with pear juice or barley syrup. They crack loudly in the candlelight, and for a moment the room is filled with crunching that sounds oddly like rain on chapel tiles. Someone jokes that if you listen closely, you can hear the Virgin Mary sighing at the noise. Another person adds, "That's not Mary, that's Brother Henry realizing we ate the alms wafers." Laughter bubbles up, just enough to warm the chill. You drift off that night with a faint film of flour still on your lips and the echo of baked devotion lingering on your breath. But before you sleep, there's one more wafer tale. In some monasteries, a secret wafer recipe was kept in locked drawers, handed only from head baker to apprentice during Lent. The recipe was spoken aloud, never written, and included strange instructions like, wait for the 3rd rooster call and whisk until the dough recites a psalm. No one's quite sure if these were real wafers or just very devout pancakes. Either way, the sweetness still reaches you. You wake to the smell of ash and lemon balm. Someone is scrubbing pans outside singing something in Breton. The air is sharp, almost citrus bright, and your first thought isn't about the road ahead, but whether there might be just one more wafer left. You check your satchel. There it is. A little cracked, a little squashed, but still whole. A pilgrim's blessing in edible form. You bite it slowly, reverently, and for a moment it feels like the world has folded in on itself, you, the road, the sweetness, the silence, all held together by something no thicker than a whisper. By the 14th day on the road, your body has made an agreement with itself. Walking is the new breathing. You don't even notice the stones anymore. Your hips swing like a hanging censer, and your steps have become a slow chant. What you do notice, however, is the smell. It hits you just outside a cluster of walnut trees, something fried. Sweet, crisp, the scent of oil and flour flirting in the air. You follow your nose like a pilgrim bloodhound and find a makeshift fairground. Tents flap in the breeze and someone's turning dough in a copper pan over coals. Fritters. Yes, even pilgrims got lucky sometimes. The cook is a woman with flour on her elbows and the confident stance of someone who's burned herself many times and lived to fry again. She hands you a little paper twist inside golden lumps, dusted in what might be sugar or maybe crushed dried rose petals. The taste is warm, rich, and unapologetically celebratory. You don't ask what's in them. You don't care. They're hot, they're yours, and they've made this dusty stopover feel like a feast day. Fried snacks were a thing in the Middle Ages, especially around festivals, saints' days, and roadside gatherings. Think sweet fritters, little dough balls filled with apples and herb-stuffed pastries that were tossed into oil and served hot to crowds. Pilgrims often timed their routes to pass through villages during local feasts, not entirely out of devotion, but let's be honest, for snacks. Tonight's historical fact, medieval fairs often featured traveling friars, cooks who specialized in fried street food, much like modern food trucks. They worked out of carts or over portable fires and sold treats like fritters, sippets, fried bread, soaked in honey, and even cheese curds rolled in batter. Pilgrims with coins got to indulge. Pilgrims without, they just hoped someone dropped a fritter. Odd detail of the night. Some friars were banned from buying fried treats during Lent, not because of gluttony, but because their robes were flammable and the frying stations were notoriously smoky. One monk allegedly set his sleeve alight, trying to haggle for a honey fritter. He was fine. The fritter was not. Here's your academic nap time conundrum. Were medieval fried foods a staple or more of an indulgent luxury? Some food historians argue they were ubiquitous and democratic, available to peasants and nobles alike. Others insist frying was expensive because of oil and therefore more ceremonial. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Fried food was rare enough to be special, but familiar enough to make a pilgrim smile. You walk slowly through the fairground now, the last of your fritters crumbling gently in their wrapper. The music from a hurdy-gurdy hums across the dusk. A child tugs at their mother's sleeve, pointing to a stall selling candied nuts. Someone offers you a sip of warm cider from a carved wooden cup. It tastes like apples, cloves, and mild rebellion. This is the joy of journeying, not just the relics, not just the prayers, but the surprise of sweetness when you least expect it. You pass a small group of pilgrims camped by a river. One is frying something over a tiny portable pan. You wave, they nod. You share the last corner of your fritter, and in return they offer a sliver of fried lentil cake wrapped in a cabbage leaf. It's crisp on the outside, soft in the middle, and tastes faintly of garlic and ash. Perfection. As the stars begin to peek through the twilight, your satchel feels lighter again. Your belly is full, your lips are oily, and your heart is strangely buoyant. Maybe fried food is divine after all. You stretch your legs and settle onto a patch of grass beside a sleeping donkey. Someone starts singing a lullaby in a language you don't know, and you drift off with visions of dancing fritters and holy oil. Tomorrow is stew day, but tonight is for the crisp and golden, the unexpected feast at the end of a dusty road. By now, the landscape begins to shift. Fields yield to forest thickens to almost silence. The road narrows and feels less like a route to salvation and more like a suggestion made by someone with poor judgment and an overly ambitious sense of adventure. The air smells of pine resin, damp bark, and something faintly metallic like a forgotten horseshoe deep in the dirt. You're walking slower now, not out of fatigue, but because everything here demands stillness. You can hear your own footsteps, your own breath, the creak of your satchel every time it shifts. And within that satchel, still a few snacks. This time you pull out a triangle of preserved apple wrapped in waxed cloth. Its skin is a bit wrinkled now, but the flavor is sharper, richer somehow. Medieval pilgrims didn't just carry bread and beans, they understood the joy of preserved fruit. Apples, pears, even plums could be dried and packed, often simmered in spiced wine first, then layered in waxed paper or linen. When unwrapped, they gave off a perfume of cloves and vinegar. It's a surprising smell to meet in a forest. You nibble and walk. A squirrel glares at you from a tree. You offer no crumbs. You are not that holy. Let's talk about preservation. While we think of medieval people as always on the edge of starvation, they were in fact deeply resourceful. Food had to travel, and snacks, yes, we'll keep calling them, that had to survive the journey. One of the smartest techniques, turning fruit into leather. Not the kind you wear, the kind you chew. Medieval fruit leather was a sticky miracle, boiled fruit pulp spread thin and dried under sun or near a fire. Rolled up, it was both medicine and dessert. Some versions even had herbs mixed in like mint for digestion or rosemary for memory. Here's tonight's historical fact. Medieval herbal manuals often listed fruit leather as a recommended carry-along for long travel days. Not only did it provide sugar and fiber, but its texture discouraged overeating. Chew slowly and with prayer, one monk wrote. That might have been a joke. Monks were secretly very funny. Now for our curious detail, some noble households crafted fruit leather into decorative shapes, hearts, crescents, even tiny shields. These were gifted to departing knights or visiting clergy. So yes, you might be halfway up a mountain chewing on a cherry-flavored moon with a saint stamped into it. But here's the question. How widespread was this chewy culture? Did every pilgrim carry their own stash of spiced pears pressed into scrolls? Or are we just romanticizing an elite treat as a universal tradition? The records are sparse. We know of its use. We know of its flavorings. But was it for everyone or just for those with access to orchards and leisure time? The forest opens just enough for a view. Below, a valley curled in mist. A monastery crouches in the distance, its pointed roof like a finger reaching into the sky. That's your goal by nightfall. Your feet don't complain anymore. Your stomach is calm. Your pockets are lined with the past. You walk. Eventually you arrive. Not with fanfare, but with relief. The monk at the gate doesn't ask questions. He sees the dust on your cloak, the crumb in your beard, the stick of fruit leather behind your ear. He nods and motions you in. Supper is bread and broth. Maybe a little cheese. It's quiet. Warm. The candlelight makes everyone look like saints, even if one of them clearly snored through the reading. You think about your snacks. You think about how far they've come with you, and how much of medieval life was spent planning not just for meals, but for moments in between. That space between hunger and fullness, between village and valley, between being a traveler and being home if only for a night. And maybe that's what makes snacks so powerful. They don't just feed, they accompany. Outside, the wind carries the scent of pine. You lie on a straw mattress, shoes tucked under the bed, and one last dried fig nestled in your palm. The journey continues tomorrow. But for now, you sleep. You wake early, too early. Monks are already chanting. A bell tolls just beside your dreams and pulls you upright with a start. The straw mattress crackles. Your knees complain. Your back files a formal objection. But the air smells of bread. That helps. In the refectory, a pot of thin barley porridge simmers. You spoon it slowly. Another monk hands you a tiny square wrapped in wax cloth. It's not labeled, but from the color and smell, you guess it's pear leather. Again, darker than before, maybe aged by monastery patience. You tuck it into your bag, the last of your food. Your shoes have been cleaned, if not entirely demudded, and your body tired but functional. That's all a pilgrim can ask. Back on the road, you notice something new. Pilgrims begin to greet one another with snacks. A piece of biscuit traded for a plum square. A nut bar shared between strangers. There's something gently radical about it, generosity wrapped in cloth. One young man offers you a triangle of something honeyed and stiff. Sunbread, he says. It's oat flour and honey pressed and left in the sun for 2 days. Crunchy, oddly soothing. And here's another fact: sunbread, or soulless panis, appears in a few obscure records described as emergency food for those too poor or pious to cook. It wasn't delicious, but it kept. In one case, a nun reportedly lived on nothing else for a full Lent, probably also survived off sheer stubbornness. Oddly enough, these humble exchanges start to feel like ritual, like communion without the chapel. You give and receive. You chew and walk. You learn names not by country or prayer, but by flavor. The pepper biscuit girl, the walnut man, that elder with mint sticks. The path grows easier somehow. Maybe it's the company. Maybe it's the carbs. Maybe it's that soft knowledge deep in your souls that even in an age of hardship, sweetness found a way to travel. You stop at a bridge, feet dangling. A girl sits beside you, humming something ancient. She hands you half a candied fennel root, and for a moment, everything tastes like laughter. You don't know her name, but you will remember the snack, and tomorrow you'll offer yours. A soft breeze stirs the hem of your tunic as you make your way into a sleepy market town just before dusk. The scent of cardamom and straw fills the air. You follow a crooked row of stones that counts as a street winding between timber-frame shops and open-air stalls, many shuttered for the evening. But not all. There, under a striped canvas awning that squeaks with every gust of wind, you find a baker packing up for the night. He's humming something ancient, a rhythm that might be a lullaby or an incantation for rising dough. A few trays remain on the counter, flaky twists, caramel-glazed roots, and what looks like a tray of golden flat rounds stacked in a linen-lined box. You point, he nods. Wafers, he says. Wafers, no wafers. A medieval hybrid between street snack and spiritual symbol, somewhere between communion and convenience. You hand over a coin still sticky from honey in your pack and accept a round disc no larger than your palm imprinted with a sunburst. The first bite is thin, crackly sweet with honey and faintly floral. Rosewater lavender, maybe both. Or maybe it's just the scent of this town wrapping itself into your tongue. Either way, you pause mid-bite and smile. Tonight's historical fact: wafries were common in medieval Europe as both sacred and secular treats. Yes, they were used in religious contexts, think communion, but also in fairs, courts, and pilgrim paths. Sometimes sold on sticks like medieval lollipops, other times folded around fillings like almond paste or mashed pears. Versatile little miracles. They were made using patterned irons, imagine an early waffle maker, but shaped like a book press. Hot coals, heavy metal, and batter that sizzled when poured in. Irons were passed down through families, customized with initials or sacred imagery. If you had a noble crest that might show up in your wafer, odd detail of the night, some medieval wafer sellers were also traveling performers. They juggle, sing bawdy songs, and hand out wafers wrapped in embroidered cloths. The snack came with a show, a jester and a dessert bundled together like an early pop-up restaurant experience. And the debate worth staying awake for: were wafers truly for the masses, or were they mostly reserved for feast days and fancy folks? Some records suggest they were everyday street food, cheap and cheerful. Others imply they were reserved for guild events, religious observances, and special occasions. Did pilgrims eat them on dusty roads, or only when they found favor with the church kitchens? You let the final bite dissolve slowly on your tongue. Around you, the town exhales into twilight. A couple holding hands stroll past with a basket full of leeks. A child chases a hoop down the alley, the clatter echoing like distant drums. A monk walks by carrying a stack of flatbread wrapped in linen, nodding at you like you both know the same secret. It's not just food, it's a story. You wander toward the fountain where pigeons are having their own chaotic supper. A crumb drops from your pocket, maybe on purpose, maybe not. One pigeon eyes you suspiciously before diving in. They too seem to have a fondness for crispy carbohydrates. You imagine the wafer sellers from a century ago calling out their wares in Latin, French, or whatever tongue the town spoke that day. Their carts, creaking irons, sizzling jokes flowing like mulled wine. Perhaps they whistled between stalls, flirting and offering samples like medieval brand ambassadors. Try the one with fennel, your holiness, and you chuckle aloud. The few townsfolk nearby look your way bemused but not bothered. A traveler talking to themselves isn't the strangest thing they've seen this week. You check your pack. A few more treats remain, but the waffle that one felt like a gift. Not just because it tasted good, but because it told a story you weren't expecting. The cobblestones are cooling now. The night presses in gently like a thick wool cloak drawn around your shoulders. You find a quiet corner near a shuttered stable and settle down for the night. Somewhere a lute is playing a slow, plucky tune that meanders like a lazy river. You close your eyes, wafers dancing through your dreams, their honeyed edges crackling like firewood in a hearth. And tomorrow maybe you'll find a seller who offers the filled kind. The road twists uphill and your calves begin composing protest hymns. The dirt path, worn soft from centuries of feet, seems to sigh under your weight. Around you the hedgerows thicken, dotted with the deep purple of sloe berries and the occasional rustle of something mouse-shaped vanishing into the underbrush. You pass a wooden shrine, a small hollow carved into a tree with a faded icon of St. Catherine and a bundle of dried rosemary. Someone's left half a honey cake there. Maybe an offering, maybe in panic. Either way, you don't touch it. Pilgrim etiquette you recall. Never take a treat meant for the saints, or worse, a squirrel's lunch. Your own snack stash is running low. You feel the edges of hunger nibble at your attention the way a bad thought clings during prayer. But you remember up ahead, just beyond the next ridge, there's a cluster of huts, and perhaps, if luck or the Virgin smiles on you, a small bakehouse run by a widow with very lenient pricing and suspiciously good spice access. Ah yes, the spice smugglers of the Pilgrim Trail. Let's pause here. Tonight's historical fact. Even during the Middle Ages, illegal spice trading was a thing. Taxes on imported goods like cinnamon, ginger, or cloves were so steep that travelers sometimes smuggled pinches of them in sewn hems, hollowed out wooden crosses, or even hidden in wax cheese rounds. It wasn't exactly the Silk Road, but it had flair. Some widows along the route would bake with these rare imports, passing off ginger-flavored biscuits as miracles. One town swore its pilgrims walked faster after eating clove-stuffed buns. Others just enjoyed the warmth, the zing, the illusion of being nobility for one delicious bite. Tonight's odd detail: in one 13th century village, a baker was fined not for using smuggled spices, but for pretending to use them. Her spiced cakes turned out to be dyed with beetroot and sprinkled with pepper ash. The deception was scandalous, though arguably creative. You crest the hill. There it is, a wisp of smoke, a crooked chimney, and the scent of something toasted and faintly sweet curling through the air. The woman you were told about stands outside, apron-dusted face like a kindly walnut. She waves you over. A simple deal, a prayer for her son lost to war in exchange for a small cake and a warm place by the oven. You sit cross-legged on the warm stone floor. The dough smells of caraway nutmeg, real nutmeg. Her secret, she says, is soaking the flour in warm ale overnight. The result is chewy, dense, and tastes like late summer. As you chew, she hums an old tune. You don't recognize the words, but the melody is familiar. Pilgrims hear many lullabies on the road. Songs travel faster than feet. And here comes the academic puzzle. Did these bakehouse women invent their recipes, or were they passed down through generations of grandmothers, brewers, and spice thieves? Some scholars say the blending of trade routes and folk memory created a unique culinary map, one loaf at a time. You sip a bit of ale too warm and too flat to be refreshing, but it soothes your throat like a bedtime brew. A young boy scampers in with a handful of dried apples. The widow tuts, then tosses the slices into a pan with honey and crushed mint. The scent is outrageous, like medieval incense with a sugary twist. You close your eyes for a moment. The hearth crackles. The old woman mutters something to a cat who clearly rules the house. You feel the weight of your bag lessen just from the smell of apple and spice. You remember why pilgrims keep walking, not for relics or salvation, though those help, but for the quiet joy of a warm, unlikely snack offered with care. 3 soft jokes for your weary path. If medieval snack taxes had calorie counts, no one would dare chew. The only thing riskier than a smuggled nutmeg, a smuggled nut. Historians argue about who invented the hand pie. Everyone else just wants the recipe. You rise, thank her, and press a small token into her hand, a shell, a coin, a promise. The road calls as it always does, but the memory of this meal will stay tucked into your thoughts like spice in a traveler's sleeve. By now your pace is slower, not because you're tired, though your legs might argue otherwise, but because you're passing through one of those valleys that seem to cradle time. The air smells like pine resin and damp stone, and somewhere nearby a flock of sheep jingle their way across a hill. You reach into your satchel. They're wrapped tightly in waxed cloth is something special, a crispy golden wafer, pressed so thin it might disappear if you breathe too hard. No ordinary snack, this one. You've been saving it. It's not a biscuit for hunger. It's a reminder that even on pilgrimages, there's room for ceremony and sweetness. Welcome to the story of the medieval wafer. Wafers weren't just early cookies. They were social, sacred, and sometimes scandalous. At their simplest, they were made of wheat flour water and a touch of oil poured onto hot patterned irons and toasted into intricate discs. Sometimes sugar was added, or honey or rose water if you had connections. They could be folded, filled, or simply admired. You nibble the edge. It's brittle but buttery, somewhere between paper and pastry. In the 14th century, this was high-class snack food served at weddings, coronations, and feast day processions. And yet, by some miracle of hunger, democracy wafers also made their way into the hands of pilgrims, street urchins, and toothless monks. Tonight's historical fact. In many towns, especially in France and England, there were dedicated waferers. Yes, that's what they were called, whose only job was to make these things. They used long-handled irons, stood in smoky stalls, and flipped hundreds a day. The richer the event, the more delicate the wafer. Odd detail, wafers were sometimes shaped like religious symbols, crosses, lambs, even saints' faces. Others were entirely floral, inspired by garden motifs or silk embroidery. Some were so ornate that people preserved them instead of eating them. Holy snacks turned art. Now here's the fun wrinkle: wafers weren't just dessert, they were currency. A wafer gifted after a successful negotiation was a sign of goodwill. Some monks offered them as penance for gossip. In a few towns, street children sang songs to wafer sellers, hoping to earn a crispy handout. You imagine the scene: a narrow medieval alley, cobblestone, slick with mist. A boy with patched trousers and a wild grin chanting a rhyme for a snack. A baker with soot-stained fingers flipping a wafer from the iron and waving it like a coin apiece. Scholarly debate of the night: were wafers a precursor to modern street food? Or were they something more ceremonial, an edible bridge between the sacred and the everyday? Some argue they were practical, flat, portable, durable. Others say they were mostly symbolic, served at moments of transition, births, marriages, the ends of journeys. You're starting to think it's both. The wafer in your hand, now half gone, feels like a map. You can trace its patterns with your tongue. It tastes faintly of almond, possibly a leftover essence from another snack stored in the same cloth. Or maybe it's wishful thinking. It's been a long walk. Nearby, another traveler is mending their sandal with what looks suspiciously like a cheese rind. Someone else is composing a letter to their future self on a piece of bark. A child draws in the dirt with a chicken feather, sketching what might be a dragon or a slightly confused horse. As the sky turns lavender, you begin to see the faint glow of a village ahead. Lanterns flicker. The smell of something frying onion maybe rides the breeze. Wafers, you realize, were like medieval postcards, edible souvenirs. Folded into them were not just ingredients, but impressions: who gave them to you, where you were, what you hoped for. You save the last bite for later. It deserves a proper farewell. And as your feet crunch toward the next inn, a thought lingers. If history had a taste, maybe it would be this light-layered and just a little bit sweet. The next morning, you wake to the scent of fried batter lingering in your dreams. Perhaps it was a memory, perhaps a miracle. But in the Middle Ages, the two were often indistinguishable. You're back on the path this time, trailing the edges of a modest village, known for its olive presses and an annual saints' festival. Whereas the legend goes, the air smells of cardamom and warm oil for 3 straight days. This part of your journey introduces you to the chaotic beauty of medieval fare snacks. Strange little dough balls dusted with sugar, soft fritters flavored with herbs, and something suspiciously like a rissole stuffed with mashed peas, and maybe a bit of bacon smuggled in under the holy radar. This isn't a quiet kind of food. It's the crackling, hissing, joyous sizzle of a time when frying was a community event and a culinary accident waiting to happen. And yes, you're still very much walking, but these snack stops are getting harder to resist. A young boy runs by with a skewer of fried cheese, shouting the price to no one in particular. An old monk bites into a dough twist while maintaining perfect eye contact with a goat that looks deeply offended. These are the sights of festive food culture, where hunger, joy, and spiritual loopholes intersect under colorful banners. Let's dig into the crispy truth. Frying wasn't just a luxury. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was a way to transform stale ingredients into something delightful. Old bread became golden sippets. Wilted greens were battered and reborn. A bit of leftover lentil mash, fry it salted and pretend it's divine, and sometimes it was. The medieval kitchen was less about recipes and more about vibes. Measurements were vague, like a pinch or until it looks ready. Timing often depended on the color of the sky. And frying, that was pure theater. You didn't just eat fried food, you watched it dance. Here's tonight's historical fact. During fairs and feast days, temporary street kitchens would pop up across European towns, manned by everyone from baker's apprentices to wandering cooks. These vendors specialized in quick, hot, energizing snacks, fritters, turnovers, little meat, or veggie patties. Some food historians argue this was the origin of Western fast food. Now for the odd detail, a 14th century manuscript includes a recipe for something called apple pillows. They were slices of apple dipped in wine spice batter, deep fried, and then covered in rose sugar. Pillow might be generous, they were reportedly dense enough to stop a sword swing. Romantic and practical. Which brings us to tonight's sleepy academic puzzle. Were medieval people as obsessed with fried food as we are? Or are we projecting our love of festival foods back onto them? Some scholars argue that frying was rare due to the cost of oil, while others point to street festival records and frying pans found in abundance at archaeological sites. You chew thoughtfully on a fritter that tastes like cinnamon, and maybe thyme. It's warm, it's crunchy, it's probably been touched by about 5 different hands, but you don't care. Hunger has a way of silencing the modern imagination. The path winds again. You pass a shrine, modest and mossy, where someone has left behind a half-eaten fried cake as an offering. Nearby, a small group of pilgrims share snacks from a single cloth bundle. Fried dough balls dates a little pot of honey. One of them offers you a bite without words. You accept, of course you do, pilgrimage etiquette. As the evening falls, your belly full of festival flavors, you begin to understand why snacks were not just indulgence, but necessity. Fried food gave energy. It lifted spirits. It turned strangers into snack-sharing companions. It was edible ritual. Now back to the road. The road dips now into a broad valley lined with dew-damp orchards, and the scent of apple blossoms wraps itself around your senses like a soft woolen scarf. You breathe in deeply, boots damp from the mist socks, probably damp from something less poetic. Somewhere nearby, a nightingale sings, and it feels almost deliberate, like nature's lullaby for pilgrims too stubborn to stop walking. And tonight you're thinking of pies, but not the celebratory pies, not the orchard-plucked, honey-drizzled, let's have a feast kind of pies. No, you're thinking of the travel pies, the mystery ones, the kind that look humble on the outside and hold stories folded tightly inside. You imagine biting into one without knowing if it holds minced root vegetables, bits of dried fish, or the sly surprise of egg and sweetened ground almonds wrapped like treasure. In the Middle Ages, pies weren't just meals. They were storage solutions, a portable pantry. Especially the crust called a coffin wasn't always meant to be eaten. It was a container, a medieval Tupperware made of flour and water baked to armor hardness. Inside could be anything: a seasoned meat mixture, a mash of lentils and herbs, or the occasional surprise plum tucked in as a nod to the cook's mood. One particularly famous style, the pilgrim pasty, Often shaped like a folded letter or a thick dumpling, it had to endure saddlebags, backpacks, and yes, even the inside of a boot. The crust was tough, but the contents could be tender. And sometimes, just sometimes, a tiny vent on top would release a whisper of garlic or rosemary, as if the pie was sighing. Tonight's historical fact: portable pies were not only eaten by pilgrims, but also by laborers, soldiers, and shepherds. Some even had a little pastry handle so the workers could hold it with dirty hands and throw the edge away afterward. Early hygiene innovation or just peasant pragmatism, possibly both. Odd detail of the night. Some medieval pie crusts were embossed with symbols, crosses, stars, or even tiny images of saints, meant to protect the food inside or signify who it belonged to. Your pie might have your initials carved into it, or a fish etched in flour to remind you it was Friday and meat was off the menu. And here's tonight's scholarly what if. Were these pies truly peasant food, or were they culinary trickle-down from the upper classes? Some argue the rich had cooks and spices enough to perfect portable pastries, and only later did the humble versions spread among travelers. Others say necessity bred creativity, and those on foot were the true inventors of the edible envelope. You step over a muddy rut and imagine a cook centuries ago patting down a crust with pride, sealing up something special for someone they cared about. Maybe it was for a child on a journey, maybe a lover, or maybe it was just take this and don't come back hungry. You pull your own snack out of your satchel, a modern bar wrapped in plastic, and suddenly it feels so sterile. You imagine the difference: the weight of a dense crust, the crumbling sound as you break it open, the surprise of rosemary and chestnut instead of vanilla protein. A passing traveler hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like a nursery rhyme. You offer a nod but keep walking. The road here is smoother. Your steps fall into rhythm. You feel like a pie yourself, travel-worn on the outside, a stew of thoughts and history bubbling inside. And then, as if summoned by your thoughts, the scent of something warm and flurry drifts from a wayside stall. It's a small gathering of pilgrims near a fire, someone handing out pocket pies wrapped in cheesecloth. You accept one. It's warm. Steam escapes as you bite in. Leeks and dried apple. Unexpected but not unpleasant. Someone asks you where you're headed. You shrug. Forward, always forward. The answer seems enough. Your shoes crunch along a gravel path now, and the stars are blinking into place above you. The pie is gone, but its warmth lingers. Somewhere ahead, the next meal waits. Perhaps another pie. Perhaps a bowl of porridge laced with herbs. Perhaps a surprise. Or maybe it's not the food that's changing. Maybe it's you. You walk on. You hear it before you smell it. The faint crunch of oil meeting dough echoing from behind a wooden stall down the path. Your feet know the sound before your stomach does. You walk closer, drawn by the hush of sizzling heat and the low hum of a fire kept alive with bark and bellows. It's a roadside fare, a miracle on this long, unending road of penance and blisters. And here at the edge of a clearing under canvas, patched with wax, someone is frying something golden. You've arrived at the medieval version of a food truck. A boy with hair too big for his cap flips discs of dough into a shallow pan. The batter bubbles turns browns. Then he smashes them with a wooden spoon into puffy, crisp-edged circles that hiss as they cool. It smells faintly of honey and something floral, lavender maybe, or wild herbs tossed in by accident. These are not your ordinary travel wafers. No, these are festival fritters, snacks made with leftover grains. Bits of egg, maybe dried apple shreds if someone was feeling generous. The oil, probably pig fat. The sweetness, a drizzle of thickened wine syrup boiled into near caramel. You've earned this. You've walked through mud and rain. You've stepped on a pine cone barefoot. You even blessed your socks yesterday. So yes, today, you buy a fritter. As you chew, the fare around you unfurls. Children dart between stalls. A man juggles 3 chicken bones. Someone is selling wool or something they swear is wool. There's even a game involving cabbages and distance best not to ask. The sound of a rabbit lilts across the market, slightly off-key and profoundly charming. Let's talk about fried foods in the Middle Ages. You might assume they were rare, perhaps even decadent, but in reality, frying was a common method, especially for festival or fair foods. Oil was expensive, yes, but communities often pooled resources for big events. Pig fat, goose fat, or even hardened butter worked just fine. Historical fact of the night medieval fritters were often filled with cheese fruit or herb batter. They appear in cookbooks like Le Ménager de Paris, 1393, a guide for household management written by a Parisian husband for his much younger wife. One recipe literally instructs take curds, eggs, and flour, make fritters, feed husband. The oddity of the evening. In some Germanic regions, monks competed to make the most delicate fritter on feast days. Not the tastiest, not the biggest, the lightest. Some were said to float for hours in wine or ale before dissolving. Imagine spending a whole Lent dreaming of air-fried cheese clouds. And here's the debate. Were these fried snacks for everyone or only the lucky few? Some argue they were reserved for holy days and nobles. Others point to market records showing commoners buying fritter ingredients in bulk. Maybe it's not so different from us where donuts are everywhere. But cronuts need a postcode. You sit under a tree with your fritter in one hand and a second fritter in your lap for spiritual backup. The batter is crisp, the inside fluffy. You bite, it's hot, barely cooled, and it tastes like bread and sunshine and maybe a little miracle. The vendor winks at you. Next batch has got raisins, he says, like he's offering gold. Nearby, two pilgrims are arguing whether fried eel counts as penance food or party food. Someone else is trying to fry a fig on a heated stone with questionable success. A child accidentally tosses his fritter into the air, and it lands in a nun's hood. She keeps it. This is the kind of scene that makes you wonder if heaven has a snack corner, it might smell like this. But it's not all greasy joy. You overhear a man complaining that his fritter was less cooked than a confession. Another swears the oil is haunted. Still, no one's leaving the stall. Fried foods have a kind of gravitational pull. You wonder if your shoes still smell like cookies. Probably. You've become a mobile pantry, a walking pastry, a pilgrim with the scent profile of a medieval kitchen. Before you move on, you wrap one last fritter in cloth. It'll be cold and soggy by sunset, but that's tomorrow's burden. Tonight, the snack is warm, and so is your heart. You nod goodbye to the boy with the too big hat, and he tosses you a piece of fried something. You catch it midair. Could be a turnip. Could be divine. And just like that, the road calls again. Your journey picks up just as the clouds begin to roll in. Not ominously, not threatening rain just yet, but with that sleepy weight that turns the sky into a woolen blanket and makes your footsteps feel less urgent. You're walking slower now, not because you're tired, but because you've started to notice the quiet details, the patterns of wheel ruts, the trampled clover near shrines, and the half-eaten rinds tucked into the cracks of milestone stones. It's as if snacks are leaving a trail of their own. Today we're exploring something entirely holy, yet deeply edible, the sacred wafer. Not the ecclesiastical host, although, yes, technically similar, but its cousin, the honey wafer, the pilgrim's crisp companion. You reach a fork in the road where a lean man in a patched brown cloak waves at you. He set up a little table, though it looks more like a repurposed cart, and on it a stack of thin golden wafers. They glimmer slightly in the overcast light, almost like coins. You approach slowly, not because you're cautious, but because something about it feels like a ritual. He offers you one without speaking. It snaps with a soft crackle when you bite into it. Not quite sweet, not quite bland, somewhere between toasted grain and dried mead. A flavor built for reflection, and maybe like the best medieval snacks, built for theological debate. Wafers in the Middle Ages weren't just for mass. There were secular versions too, called oblata dulcis in some records. Crisped on hot irons, often flavored with herbs, honey, or even cheese. These wafers were portable, stackable, and importantly, could be eaten slowly. A wafer could last you a good mile if you didn't get too contemplative. Quirky detail. In some towns, children were sent to confession with a wafer in hand as a kind of edible reminder of virtue. Confess, crunch, contemplate. Now, for our scholarly dilemma, were these sweet wafers merely for enjoyment, or were they also considered a kind of spiritual sustenance outside formal Mass? Some argue that their role blurred the line between body and soul, between culinary comfort and sacred ritual. Others point out that by the 13th century there were enough secular wafer presses to warrant a guild in Paris. The man at the cart smiles and offers you another. This one's thinner, almost translucent. You can see light through it. You ask what it's made of. He taps his iron press and says something about patience, bees, and prayer. You thank him, drop a coin into the small carved box on his cart, and continue. The wafer lingers on your tongue long after it's gone, like a hymn half remembered. As the clouds shift above you, a light drizzle begins to fall. Not enough to soak, just enough to change the rhythm of your steps. The wafer has done its job. You feel centered, settled a little more in step with the world. Further down the road, you pass a group of children playing a game involving flat stones and what appears to be a wafer press carved from wood. They're mimicking adults, pretending to be monks and priests. One child, wearing a blanket like a robe, solemnly offers another a cracker made of dirt. Everyone laughs, even the fake monk. And isn't that the legacy of snacks like this? Something that brings flavor, memory, and meaning to even the muddiest part of the road. You adjust your pack, your shoes squish faintly, and somewhere in your pocket, the edge of another wafer presses gently against your leg, unbroken. You wake up earlier than usual this morning. Your bones might disagree with that decision, but your nose does not. Somewhere nearby, someone is frying something. The scent is part dough, part spice, and all temptation. It floats on the damp morning air, cutting through the mildew, and must have traveled. You're instantly alert, but try not to move too fast. You're still very much held together by bread and determination. The camp you found yourself in is half forest clearing, half gossip circle. A dozen pilgrims sit or squat near a makeshift fire pit, around which rests a flat slab of stone, warmed enough to double as a griddle. You notice one traveler ladling a mixture onto the hot surface. It sizzles quietly, no oil, just heat. She flips the disc and hands it off to a fellow with a wooden plate and a grin. Morning wheaten, she calls it. There's no formal breakfast in this era. There's breaking fast. And for medieval pilgrims, that might look like whatever didn't spoil overnight or whatever could be heated again with little ceremony. Flatbreads, pan-fried mash, and honey-thickened barley cakes were all common morning fare, especially when you had to eat quickly and move quickly. You shuffle forward and are handed your own cake, a misshapen circle dotted with wild sage and what might be crushed apple peel. It's warm, it's dry, it tastes like the forest floor and dreams of dinner. This is a moment when food feels more ritual than meal. Sharing breakfast among pilgrims is almost liturgical, a practice of necessity turned into communion. A bite, a nod, a prayer. Repeat. You find a rock and settle into it as best you can, watching the morning wake up. Birds that you do not recognize singing songs you've never heard flit about with more grace than any of you can muster. Someone sneezes. Someone else offers a dried mint leaf as if it's a miracle cure. Another offers a joke about how his snore scared off a fox. And through it all, the quiet crunching of travelers trying not to finish their breakfast too fast. Here's your historical fact of the morning in some pilgrimage routes. Small hostels or inns would offer a first meal included in your lodging, usually broth and crusts or hot porridge. But this hospitality varied wildly. Wealthier regions might offer actual cured meat. Others simply let you sleep near the fireplace and hoped your shoes didn't smell too bad. Quirky detail. Some travelers use specific chants or blessings before consuming even simple food like barley griddle cakes. These mini rituals change depending on the region. One prayer translated loosely to, "Thank you for the flour and the fire and the feet to walk away from it." And the scholarly debate, were these impromptu campsites common or the exception? Some researchers believe most pilgrims stayed at monasteries or way stations whenever possible, not in clearings or roadsides. But diary fragments and folk songs suggest otherwise, that informal fireside breakfasts were not just real, but deeply cherished. You finish your morning wheaten and pat your pockets. There's still a fig bar wrapped in cloth, a heel of onion bread, and a coin you nearly forgot about. all the riches one could need. The path awaits again, but now your steps feel different. Food does that. It's not just sustenance, it's a contract. You've broken bread with strangers. You've traded laughter for lentils. You're not just passing through the landscape anymore. You're part of it. Ahead, there's talk of a small fair in the next town. Pilgrims buzz about roasted pears ale bread and maybe even music. But that's for the next chapter. For now, you savor the last bits of warmth in your fingers and remind yourself that even griddle cake made on a rock can be a reason to smile. Your eyes are half closed as you wander through the dusky grove where the scent of crushed leaves mixes with something richer, thicker, almost floral. You glance down at the satchel swaying at your hip, where the last of the rose-scented almond balls are cradled like treasure. They're sticky, sweet, slightly squashed from the weight of a folded tunic, but still intact. You promised yourself you'd save them for a moment just like this. It's not lost on you that medieval pilgrims had a flair for turning even fast-day snacks into poetry. When butter was banned and meat was a sin whispered on Fridays, people reached for creativity instead of despair. And sometimes what emerged wasn't just edible, it was exquisite. Take the rose almond confections you're about to savor. These weren't mere candies. They were textural fantasies of ground almond paste, blended with honey scented with petals, and often shaped into tiny hearts or fish. No ovens needed, just patience, a mortar and pestle, and enough rose water to make your fingers smell like gardens for days. Tonight's historical fact. During Lenten fasts, monks and lay people alike turned to almond-based mock foods. Almond milk replaced dairy almond paste, substituted for meat textures, and elaborate molded confections provided festive flair, while technically staying within the rules. It was food theology at its finest. And here's your quirky detail. In some medieval cookbooks, there's a recipe for fish made of almonds meant to fool the eye. Crafted with precision, painted with plant-based colors, and sometimes even shaped with real fish bones. As molds, these snacks weren't just meat-free, they were medieval illusionism. You stop under a canopy of trees and nibble the edge of an almond rose. The crunch of sugar crust gives way to the softness beneath, and there it is, the perfume of another time. No wonder these treats were served to pilgrims at special hostels, comfort cloaked in piety. The deeper question tonight, did all these mock foods reflect spiritual sincerity or a stubborn desire to bend the rules deliciously? Scholars debate whether these culinary illusions were signs of devotion or clever rebellion. After all, if you can't roast a duck, you might as well mold one out of chickpeas and sugar. Not far off, a fellow traveler plucks a berry from a bush and offers you one with a grin. You accept, and the tart flavor jolts you from your almond reverie. The contrast is stark, earthy versus ethereal. It's a perfect symbol of the medieval fast restraint and indulgence walking hand in hand. As the light dims further, you recall stories of Lent feasts where nobles and friars alike competed to outdo each other with the most elaborate non-meat dishes. Not in defiance, but perhaps as a celebration of how far creativity could stretch when placed under limits. You've passed towns where cookshops still honor these traditions, preparing fake eggs made of almond yolks and sugared shells, or cheese crafted entirely from sweetened milk of almonds. You've seen festival displays with towers of rose-scented balls and candies shaped like lambs, none of which ever bleated. And yet for every ornate creation, there were quiet snacks too. Steamed barley cakes eaten plain, dried plums softened in water, thin broths with nothing floating in them but memory. The almond sweet dissolves on your tongue. It's not heavy, it doesn't linger, but it leaves behind a thought that sometimes the effort to replicate something forbidden creates a kind of reverence that the original never inspired. You rise from your patch of moss and brush off the crumbs. The moon has begun to rise, casting silver over the treetops, and your path glows pale and clear. Somewhere ahead, a friary kitchen may be cooling a new batch of almond fish. Somewhere behind, a peasant child may be poking a rose ball and wondering if it's magic. And here you are, in between worlds, chewing history under the stars. Tonight you pass a weathered roadside, cross its wood, cracked and softened by centuries of sun and rain. The air smells faintly of smoke. Somewhere someone is roasting something. A pilgrim's nose knows it's chestnut season. You make your way toward the scent, following a path that winds down past a crumbling fieldstone barn. There you find an old couple huddled over a brazier, tending a small heap of fire-blackened nuts. No coins are exchanged, just a smile, a nod, and the gift of warmth. The chestnuts are wrapped in paper scraped from a disused chapel flyer. You press one between your fingers, its shell yielding to reveal the soft, sweet interior. The taste is gentle, earthy, almost solemn, like autumn wrapped in a lullaby. Medieval snack culture didn't rely on loud flavors or crunchy bravado. Sometimes it was a quiet handful of nuts. Sometimes it was a plum hidden in a pouch for 3 days, until the sugar fermented into something vaguely forbidden. Sometimes it was chestnuts roasted not for indulgence, but for survival. Here's your historical truth for the evening. In many parts of Europe, especially the Alpine and Mediterranean regions, chestnuts were not just a snack, they were a lifeline. In times when grain harvests failed or meat was too expensive, people turned to the chestnut tree, the so-called bread tree. Chestnuts were dried, ground into flour, or boiled into porridge. But on feast days or shared among pilgrims, they were roasted. And for a few sacred minutes, food was both necessity and pleasure. Odd detail of the night, some monasteries reportedly classified chestnuts as a kind of fruit for fasting purposes. That meant they could technically be eaten during certain food restrictions. It's the kind of ecclesiastical loophole that would make a canon lawyer smirk and a hungry monk weep with gratitude. Now comes the twist. Not all chestnuts were created equal. Some were bitter, others sweet. Some had to be cooked twice. Some were secretly hoarded by villagers who knew just the right time to pick them, not too early, not too late. The chestnut season was an unspoken calendar marked not in ink but in taste. The scholarly debate, were chestnuts really as central to the medieval diet as some believe? Or have we over-romanticized them in the modern rediscovery of ancient grains and forest foods? Food historians are split. Some say evidence of chestnut-based culture is overblown, citing elite menus and monastic rules that barely mention them. Others point to rural regions where chestnut-based bread and porridge became staple fare for generations. You sit back, letting the firelight lick your boots. The couple smiles at you again, not saying a word. Silence is currency here. You nod in thanks and continue on your path, a warm bundle of nuts tucked safely inside your cloak. The moon is beginning to rise, brushing silver across the fields. Another pilgrim joins you, a wiry man with one eyebrow permanently raised. He offers a small cloth bundle. Inside, something sticky and golden. Honeyed almonds. He grins. For the road. You take one. The crunch is subtle, the sweetness slow. This is no merchant's fare. This was made at home, maybe by a wife, a sister, or a neighbor who owed him a favor. Or maybe by himself as a gesture of quiet confidence. Honeyed almonds were not uncommon in the later Middle Ages. Often made with herbs like rosemary or cinnamon bark, they were the medieval version of a snack mix. Portable, high in energy, and when stored, well able to last days. One manuscript mentions them as comfits for comfort, handed out to traveling students and scribes. Another describes them as part of a knight's parting gift, a handful of sweetness to hold in a saddlebag. So now your walking shoes laced tight, a soft bundle of roasted nuts in one pocket and honeyed almonds in the other. Your feet are no longer sore, they're simply tired in a noble way, as if they've joined a lineage of feet that walked before. You pass a painted shrine barely lit by a candle stub. Someone has left a sliver of cheese. Another has tucked in a note. Pilgrimage is never just about destination. It's about memory, story, taste, and gesture. It's about the way roasted nuts taste better by firelight. The way a crunchy almond tells you someone cared. The road continues. Tonight's historical fact: pilgrims often use food as tokens of passage, both physical and spiritual. At some shrines like Santiago de Compostela, pilgrims would leave behind food at waypoints or consume specific items as part of sacred rites. It was common for a traveler to save one sweet cake until they reached the final stop, consuming it alone in silent reflection. You find yourself walking slower now, not because you're tired though. Let's be honest, you are, but because the path has turned into one of those soft, grass-lined trails that tempts you to take your shoes off and let your socks feel the breeze. A hedgerow buzzes lazily with bees to your left. To your right, a tiny roadside shrine weathered by decades of passing pilgrims, shelters a flickering votive candle. Someone has left a half-eaten apple beside it, maybe as a small offering, or maybe they just didn't like apples. Tonight your snack comes with a sense of ritual. It's a pressed fig loaf about the size of your palm wrapped in oiled paper. It's dense, sticky, and has that unmistakable hint of fermentation that says this thing traveled with you, not just beside you. You nibble slowly the way you might handle a sacred text. You chew in silence except for the birds and maybe a passing mule's bell. You begin to think about snacks that aren't just food but symbols. In medieval Europe, some foods carried such ritual meaning that they were only consumed during certain events or in specific emotional states. Take the almond cookie, for instance. It wasn't just a treat, it was a soft goodbye when leaving home, or a cautious hello upon entering a strange town. Some even say it served as edible currency among certain pilgrims. Others traveled with honey wafers oblata dulces pressed between pages of a psalter or sewn into hems. These weren't always eaten. Some were given to others as acts of mercy or bartered at gates where tolls were collected in food. Odd detail of the night. In some regions, bread or cake was stamped with the image of a saint, not for marketing, but for blessing. Some towns had communal molds used once a year just to make cakes worthy of divine approval. Imagine biting into a pastry and seeing the face of Saint Hubert looking up at you, slightly melted, vaguely amused. A group of children runs past. Well, you assume they're children. In this light, everyone under 5 feet looks ageless. They're carrying bundles of mint and singing something about St. James. You smile. The fig loaf is finished. You wipe your hands on your cloak. Sticky fingers, sacred trail. Another day down. Your blanket tonight is thin, but the stars are generous. You lie back against your pack, which still smells faintly of fennel and leather. One last almond cookie waits in your pouch. Tomorrow, maybe. And perhaps that's the point. Not everything sacred needs to be consumed all at once. You wake early today, not because of some grand revelation or miracle, but because the rooster at the inn decided 4 a.m. was as good a time as any to begin its personal opera. You groan quietly, but soon the other pilgrims are rising too, stirring their sacks and stretching with the dramatic flair of minor saints. You find yourself at the communal hearth, nursing a lukewarm bowl of something porridge-like. A monk offers you a fig dried and wrinkled as his own smile. You thank him and tuck it into your pouch, a little treasure for later. The fire crackles with stories still half asleep, and someone quietly hums a melody that could be either sacred or tavern-born. As you step outside, the early light is golden and sleepy, brushing everything with a softness that feels like it's tiptoeing around the world. Your feet are sore, your legs stiffer than the bannocks handed out yesterday, but there's something bright in your chest. You're getting closer. Closer to what? That's always the question. For medieval pilgrims, destinations were many: Santiago, Canterbury, Rome, Jerusalem, but the snacks, oddly enough, were often similar. One in particular comes to mind today: honey wafers. These weren't your church's host wafers, thin and tasteless as air. No, these were crisp, fragrant, and cooked between metal irons, carved with sacred designs or family emblems. They might be brushed with honey or layered with almond paste. If you were lucky, there'd be a whisper of rosewater or cinnamon, precious, rare, and instantly delightful. A commonly known historical fact: medieval wafers, or oblata dulces, were both religious and recreational. Some were made in monasteries and given to the sick or the traveling poor. Others were sold by street vendors, especially near pilgrimage stops or city gates. The line between communion and cookie was not so clear. An odd detail to savor: in some regions, wafer makers were required by guild law to own a special apron, with pockets only for flour and prayer slips. A baker in Bruges allegedly kept love notes folded beside his recipe clove powder. Sweet indeed. Today's scholarly question, were wafers more holy or hungry? Their dual role, spiritual and secular, makes it hard to tell. Some historians believe pilgrims treated them as edible relics. Others see them as practical snacks with a dash of symbolism. Is the wafer sacred because of where it's sold, or is it sacred because you needed something sweet after your feet gave up? You walk steadily, now passing another marker, an old tree shaped like a crooked staff. Pilgrims have carved names into it for generations. You see Elena of Rheims and Thomas, 1293, near the base hearts and fish symbols, surrounding them like whispered prayers. Lunch is another picnic of crumbs and creativity. A young couple shares pickled walnuts wrapped in grape leaves. You contribute half a turnip and a stale honey wafer from yesterday. The turnip tastes exactly like the road dry, determined, and slightly unforgiving. There's something comforting, though, in this shared strangeness. You're all nibbling on bits of memory and the hope little edible testaments to the human desire to keep moving. Even when your socks smell like relics. A donkey passes wearing bells and dragging a cart filled with apples. A woman waves from its seat and tosses a small pouch your way. Inside, 3 sugar-dusted almond wafers and a note, "Keep walking." The road is watching. You don't know if she's a baker, a prophet, or just a really enthusiastic snacker. But you keep walking. That evening, you settle by a quiet stream. The moon is a silver comma in the sky. You take out one wafer bite in and let the sweetness melt across your tongue like a promise. One fellow pilgrim hums the same tune from this morning. You hum with him now. Together you share a wafer and a laugh, realizing neither of you knows the words or the melody. But you hum anyway, because tonight the road is kind, and the cookies for once aren't in your shoes. By now your feet know the path better than your eyes do. Pebbles speak their own language under your boots, and the distant bleating of sheep feels as familiar as your own breath. Yet as you come over a mild rise and see the outline of another roadside chapel, slim-worn wrapped in ivy, you remember something: wafers. Not the holy kind you receive at Mass, though in fairness, those too were technically snacks. No, these are pilgrim wafers, crisp and often sweetened, made by vendors who hovered around church steps like bees around flowers. You don't smell one yet, but your memory places it on your tongue. The delicate crunch, the fleeting hint of honey, and maybe rosewater. The history of the wafer is complicated. Is it bread? Is it dessert? Is it communion with extra flair? In the Middle Ages, wafers had a dual life. Some were sacred, plain thin, pressed with crosses, baked by nuns in solemn quiet. Others were the opposite, playful, spiced, sprinkled with sugar, wrapped in paper cones for children and travelers alike. These wafers might be sold by the same hands that rang the church bell. You find a flat stone and sit. From your bundle, you pull a cloth-wrapped packet tucked earlier by a baker who winked as he handed it to you. Unwrapping it reveals 3 little wafers, browned, firm, slightly bent at the corners from travel. They smell faintly of cinnamon and, is that lavender? Wafers weren't uniform. Medieval wafer makers known as obloyers were a mix of liturgical servants and street artists. Some even etched messages into their wafers using carved wooden plates, prayers, names, or cheeky jokes. You imagine biting into one and reading "Bless this mess." Tonight's historical fact: wafers were so culturally embedded in late medieval Europe that wafer making became a specialized trade regulated in guilds by the 14th century. In Paris, you could only sell street wafers if you belonged to the wafer makers' fraternity and baked in approved ovens. These weren't just snacks, they were livelihoods. Here's your quirky detail. Some wafers were used as edible invitations. That's right, medieval nobles occasionally sent decorated wafers as a part of formal summons to feasts or weddings. Imagine receiving a crunchy RSVP. And for the academic debate of the evening, were sweet wafers and sacred ones always made separately? Some argue there was strict division: nuns for God, vendors for markets. Others suggest that in smaller towns, the line blurred with one oven serving all. Your own wafers crumble gently in your hands. You eat one slowly, letting each bite dissolve like parchment soaked in memory. The sugar isn't sharp, it's soft, floral, a whisper of sweetness. Someone somewhere made these with care and intention. Maybe with prayer. maybe with profit, possibly both. The chapel ahead is small, barely big enough for 10 kneeling pilgrims. But outside, there's a small stone table with an inscription in Latin, partly rubbed away. You read it slowly, the letters familiar yet weathered. Panis non solum, resuscitiam. Not just bread, also laughter. You chuckle. That's the thing about medieval snacks. They were never just fuel. They carried messages, emotional, social, sacred. They told stories. A wafer wasn't just a bite, it was a mood, a shared joke, a promise baked into something perishable. The sun is softening again, drawing long shadows across the road. You pack your things. The last wafer you tuck into the edge of your sleeve as if it might keep your wrist company for the next stretch. You wonder if anyone else in the procession ahead is carrying snacks tucked inside their cloaks. And now a small joke before you go. What do you call a wafer made in a monastery? A holy crunch. You're welcome. You stand and stretch joints, crackling like twigs. Another bend in the road awaits another bell tower in the distance. Perhaps more wafers, or maybe a bowl of lentils if luck smiles wide. But for now, your sleeve smells like sugar and spice, and maybe that's enough. Somewhere between the market square and the monastery gardens, you stumble into a scent that feels like a secret. It's sweet nutty and tinged with smoke, almost like sugar that's been kissed by fire. And sure enough, there under the arch of a narrow stone alleyway, a small group of street vendors huddle beside a brazier roasting chestnuts in a perforated pan. You pause just briefly. It's technically a pause of spiritual reflection, but also roasted chestnuts. That's pilgrim code for moral exception granted. You trade a copper coin for a warm paper twist of them, and the heat seeps into your palm. You crack the first one open with numb fingers, the shell giving way with a soft snap. The nut inside is golden tender, a little floury. Perfect. Medieval street snacks weren't just about flavor. They were about resilience. Chestnuts like these were the poor man's feast and the weary traveler's salvation. Grown wild in the forests, gathered by peasants and sold hot in cities, they were affordable warmth. Monks roasted them in silence. Children hoarded them in cloaks. Kings probably claimed they were too humble, but likely ate them in private. You think of how many hands touched these chestnuts, the forager, the fire stoker, the merchant with soot-darkened cheeks. Food like this was not just sustenance, it was community. It crossed class lines, bent rules, and made nighttime alleys smell like home. The next pouch of snack you pull from your satchel is just as humble honeyed almonds. They're clumped together in a sticky knot like a medieval granola bar that had a bad day. But as you nibble the first one, the toasted flavor unfolds smoky, spiced with maybe a touch of cinnamon bark, and unmistakably cheerful. These were celebration food found at fairs, weddings, feast days. But you've saved them for your lonely evening walk. Here's your historical fact for tonight. Honeyed nuts were a common delight in both urban and rural Europe during the High and Late Middle Ages. Almonds were one of the few exotic ingredients to become widely available thanks to trade routes and religious imports. While expensive, they were still accessible in small quantities, especially during festive times. Monasteries sometimes used almonds in Lenten dishes, substituting them for animal fats. The curious detail, some pilgrims, especially wealthier ones, carried almond paste or even early forms of nougat tucked into linen satchels. There's even record of a certain bishop who allegedly insisted on sweetmeats in all his travel packs for morale. The notes say, though, we suspect it was just a sweet tooth in a fancy robe. Tonight's scholarly wrinkle. To what extent were these nut-based snacks used as currency or bribes? Some documents hint at almonds being offered to guards, gatekeepers, or monks in exchange for entry or leniency. Food has always blurred into power. You chew your sticky, joyful almond mess, then wipe your hands on your tunic with the practiced shrug of someone who gave up on cleanliness a village ago. The bells toll once more. A night procession passes in the distance, their candles flickering like distant fireflies. Pilgrims hum softly. One begins to sing a hymn in a minor key. Your snack, your feet, your breath, they fall into rhythm. There's something powerful about snacks in the dark. They're quiet, personal, oddly holy. Not just fuel, but comfort. You begin to see them not as indulgences, but as rituals. At the edge of the village, you spot a man selling sugared chestnuts pressed into little scrolls of paper, with woodcut angels stamped on the sides. Blessed confections, he calls them. Protect your soul and your stomach. You almost laugh, but also you buy one, just in case. You continue on the path now, lit only by a sliver of moon and the memory of caramelized sugar. Hey friends, tonight let's explore something a little sweet, a little crummy, and just a bit dusty like your grandma's cookie tin, but with more Latin inscriptions. We're going back to the days when shoes squeaked with wool, not rubber, and when cookies weren't just treats, they were survival tools. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And of course, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your time zone in the comments. Dim those lights, fire up a fan for that cozy background sound, and let's settle in for the journey ahead. You're walking along a dirt road now. Pebbles crunch underfoot. The sun is somewhere above, cloaked behind a gentle smear of clouds. There's a breeze, cool, grassy, the kind that tugs at your woolen cloak and whispers, "Did you pack enough?" And you did, didn't you? Or maybe you didn't, and now you're chewing on the only thing that hasn't gone stale, a cookie from your shoe. It sounds ridiculous, but it's true. In the High Middle Ages, from around the 11th to 14th centuries, Europe blossomed into one of the greatest walking experiments in history, the pilgrimage. Whether it was the scallop shell route to Santiago de Compostela, the long, dusty trail to Rome, or the holy and slightly terrifying road to Jerusalem, people walked. A lot. Rich people, poor people, people with questionable maps. And all of them had one big problem: medieval trail mix didn't exist. So they improvised. Tonight, your snack of choice is a biscuitum, a hard, twice-baked lump of flour water, and sometimes honey or dried fruit. It's not chewy. It doesn't crumble. It's more like an edible stone tablet. But the miracle is, it lasts forever. Pilgrims often tuck these into belt bags, and yes, even shoes. Why? Because shoes were warm, dry, and already smelled like desperation. Why not store food there too? Some tales claim the cookies were wrapped in linen. Others say they were rubbed with oil to preserve them. But here's your first odd truth of the night. The cookie and shoe trick wasn't just about storage. In some regions, pilgrims believed it protected them from illness or demons. Bless your feet, bless your food. And if you're lucky, blister-free toes. You take another bite, slow, contemplative, crunchy enough to wake a nearby sparrow. The taste is simple flour, maybe a whisper of nutmeg. Not bad, not great, but deeply comforting. As you walk, you notice others joining the path. Some carry staffs, others rosary, others just the weight of questions. And they all munch something. One older woman offers you a round flat cake, slightly cracked, slightly sticky. You thank her and she grins. Almond and vinegar, she says proudly. Medieval cookies came in endless varieties. Some were rich, stuffed with imported spices and sugars saved for the wealthy or holy days. Others were made from chestnut flour, chickpeas, or oats, humble ingredients baked with care. But most importantly, they were portable. A cookie wasn't a dessert, it was a plan, a companion, a roadmap made of crumbs. Now let's pause for one of those classic scholarly debates no one asked for. Were these medieval snacks cookies? By today's definition, culinary historians bicker about it. Some say yes, they were baked sweets, small and round. Others argue no, they were survival rations with no joy whatsoever. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, a sacred overlap of practicality and pastry. You keep walking. Ahead, a small shrine glows in the evening light. A flickering candle, a ribbon tied around a tree branch. Someone has left a tiny offering, a cookie shaped like a scallop shell. You smile. It's a symbol of St. James, patron of pilgrims. Edible devotion, literal food for thought. A donkey ambles by carrying bundles wrapped in wool. One slips loose. You catch it, a bag of dried apple rings and biscuits. The owner thanks you and offers a trade. One cookie for another. Yours is simple. Theirs surprisingly salty with a hint of rosemary. You nod, amused. A medieval snack swap. The original bartering system, now with extra carbs. Of course, not all cookies were for travelers. In monasteries, special journey biscuits were prepared for those about to leave for long distances. They were blessed often with prayers for safe passage. There's a calm intimacy in imagining monks gathering around a kitchen fire whispering Latin over baking trays. Tonight's quirky detail. In some parts of Europe, bakers would stamp cookies with tiny images, a sun, a cross of pilgrim's staff. Not just decoration, they believed the symbol transferred protection to the traveler, protection by pastry, the most delicious defense mechanism in history. You pause at a stream, the water burbles softly. You sit on a mossy rock, take off your shoe and inspect what's left. One slightly smushed cookie. It's warm from your foot, but still whole. You smile. Chewy or not, this one's been with you for miles. You snap it in half. A small miracle, it's not moldy. There's something deeply human in that bite. A reminder that even centuries ago, people knew a journey without a snack is just suffering with extra steps. So you chew slowly. You watch the light dip below the hills. Someone in the distance sings softly something old and off-key, a lullaby for pilgrims, a hymn for cookies. And as your eyes begin to close, here's your final trivia bite. Some recipes for medieval travel cookies are still used today. Pan forte in Italy, Pfeffernusse in Germany. Dense fragrant, meant to last through storms and stories. One last thought before sleep nibbles at your edges. If you packed a cookie in your shoe today, would it be for hunger or hope? Hey, you've made it. Not just through muddy miles and crumb-filled socks, but through the whole winding, crumbling, honey-drizzled road of medieval snacking. Tonight you've got one last story before you sleep. One final bite before the fire goes out. And this one, it's about what people ate when there was nothing left to eat. Picture it a village ringed by frost, or maybe stone walls cracking under siege. The markets are empty, the stores have withered, trade routes have closed. Your stomach is making sounds only dogs can hear. And yet, someone pulls out a little something. It's not fancy, it's not fresh, but it's a snack born of crisis. Let's talk about crisis snacks. Yes, it's a real thing. In the Middle Ages, famine was a frequent visitor, sometimes a long-term tenant. When harvests failed, people turned to foods that stretched time, calories, and creativity. One such invention, acorn bread. Yes, you read that right, acorns. Once leached of their bitterness in running water or boiled with ashes, the nuts could be ground into a coarse, gritty flour. Mix that with barley or rye, and you had a dense loaf that could fill a belly, if not a heart. You walk through this mental market of desperation. A stall offers soup made from onion skins boiled long enough to produce a golden illusion of flavor. Another vendor offers stone broth hot water with a pebble and a prayer. The idea simmer long enough and something magical might happen, or at least warm your hands. Tonight's historical fact. During times of famine, many European towns had official lists of what could be legally substituted for flour or meat in breads and stews. These lists included tree bark inner layers, moss ground beans, old cheese rinds, and even boiled leather. The goal was survival, not satisfaction. You nibble an imaginary morsel of siege cake, a crust of barley paste, mixed with marrowbone shavings and dried roots. Maybe there's a hint of garlic. Maybe that's wishful thinking. Odd detail of the evening. Some monasteries reportedly made ghost cheese, a pale, nearly flavorless concoction made from almond milk whipped with chalk and vinegar formed into soft rounds for fast days or when dairy cows had vanished. The chalk for texture, the vinegar for bravery. But here's where the question gets spicy. Are these recipes exaggerations passed down in horror stories? Or do they reflect real daily adaptations by ordinary people who knew how to make a feast from a famine? Scholars are divided. Some argue that these recipes reflect desperation, folklore stories passed on to warn or humble. Others point to cookbooks and civic records that detail exact substitutions, quantity limits, and community kitchens built solely for such periods. You stretch out, pulling your blanket closer, as if the cold from that imagined winter famine seeped through the page. The thing is, not all crisis snacks were grim. Some were ingenious, like dried turnip slices soaked in vinegar and sun-dried again, then chewed like jerky, or roasted chickpeas coated in ashes and salt, or honeyed rose hips smashed into a kind of chewy leather, equal parts medicine and candy. In fact, the roots of street food may lie in these very moments. Traveling vendors who could make 5 turnips taste like 50 became neighborhood heroes. Monks with a knack for turning bean paste into something halfway divine got better seats at the fire. Resourcefulness became a spice of its own. You imagine the conversations. That's not meat, it's walnut paste. Well, it fooled my cousin. Then it's dinner. Or the debates boiled boot soles again. They're tender this time. Your feet ache just thinking about it. But also your respect grows. Because these snacks weren't just fuel, they were defiance. A way to say I'm still here. A little crunchy rebellion against bad harvests and worse luck. So here's your final mental bite of the night, the image of a mother sharing the last heel of moss bread with her child, whispering stories into the steam. Or a monk stirring a pot of bean water stew, humming a tune no one else remembers. Or a soldier passing a scrap of dried apple to a friend on a freezing wall. No feast, but enough. It's easy to romanticize history from a soft pillow. But these crisis snacks are reminders of hunger, yes, but also of ingenuity, of quiet humor, of survival as an art form. And now as the imaginary fire crackles low and your eyelids grow heavy, remember even the humblest snack once carried the weight of hope. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace. And now the road is quiet. Your shoes once stuffed with cookies, dreams, and maybe a few regrets now sit empty beside your cot. The last ember in the hearth crackles softly as if whispering secrets with the night wind. You stretch beneath the woolen blanket, head heavy with crumbs of stories. All those strange, dusty snacks, the honeyed crisps wrapped in parchment, the oniony biscuits cracked along the seams, the figgy discs hidden in tunics. All those pilgrims, farmers, bakers, monks, and mischief makers weaving crumbs into history. Was it about the food or the journey? Maybe both, because in the end, these snacks were never just calories. They were symbols, rituals, little edible maps of hope and faith and stubborn survival. A pressed wafer in a shoe becomes a promise to keep going. A fried dough twist becomes a prayer against famine. A lump of almond cheese whispers, "You are not alone." So now as the candles flicker low and the softest sleep begins to pull at your eyelids, let the final truth linger. History isn't made of great battles or kings alone. Sometimes it's baked into bread crusts and carried in patched socks. And that, strangely enough, is where the soul of the past rests best, quietly, gently, with a hint of cinnamon. That's the story for tonight. May your dreams be filled with wonder and peace.